Chapter 14:12. Clang. The blade and the spear collided with each other, causing a crisp sound. The eyes of the god slayer holding the holy spear and the god of disobedience holding the divine blade were burning with unyielding fighting spirit. They mercilessly swung their weapons that would go down in history at each other. Clang. 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 The fierce sound of collision continued as the holy spear and the divine blade collided and shook the space, and frequently set off bursts of sparks that couldn't be extinguished even in the storm. In Japanese mythology, the hero who killed the snake and slayed the dragon was simply like a storm, with a trace of warlike laughter. Like a violent storm, the divine blade in his hand violently slashed more than a dozen times in a very short period of time, causing pieces of blade's shadows to flicker together with the arc light in the space, like a crescent moon slashing forward. That skill was worthy of its name. An amazing skill that only gods had the means to use, but it was vividly displayed by this god who had been wandering for thousands of years. In the face of such an amazing skill, Noah was like a windmill, relying on the same amazing physical strength. He heavily swung the holy spear. If Susanoo was the pinnacle of skill, then Noah was the pinnacle of strength. Every time Susanoo used his amazing divine skills to continuously wave out a storm of slashes, Noah would not be outdone and fiercely sweep out with a blow that could split mountains and split rocks. This sweep was like a gust of wind sweeping away the fallen leaves, sweeping away all the slashes that flashed together with the light in the space, and bouncing off the divine blade. This scene had been going on for quite some time. However, the attack and defense of the two people did not change at all. Noah has been standing in the same place, without moving. He just swung the holy spear, making the holy spear bring out a burst of whistling sound. Susanoo wanted to violently crush Noah countless times, but every time, he was swept away by the terrible power of the holy spear, which was like a windmill that was swung by the holy spear like a windmill, and he couldn't succeed in making Noah take a step back. Clang. 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 The attack and defense that only appeared in myths and legends continued. The continuous sound of collisions rang out, accompanied by dazzling sparks that appeared in the storm. The holy spear that swept across like a windmill and the divine blade that slashed like moonlight continued to collide. Clang. At a certain moment, a sound that was clearer than any of the previous clashes reverberated through the air. Goo! Susanoo couldn't help but let out a muffled groan as he was once again swept away, and continuously retreated dozens of steps before stopping. This time, Susanoo didn't continue his frenzied attacks. Instead, he rotated his numb arm and stared at Noah, who was casually raising the holy spear. So that's how it is. Although his skills are lacking, his arm strength is incomparably shocking. In terms of skills, other than the sword, Noah was only proficient at the level of an average person. Although it couldn't be said to be unpresentable, in front of a god with a divine skill, it was indeed quite inadequate. However, Noah had an amazing physical ability. After reaching LV5, and all the basic abilities reached the SSS stage, Noah's physical ability had already reached the level of a god. In addition, if one observed carefully, they would find that Noah's hands and feet were still surrounded by magic lines like electric wires, which was obviously a sign of the use of enhanced magic. With these two superimposed, even compared with the 16 knights in reverse, Noah's physical ability would not be the slightest bit weaker. Naturally, it was beyond the level of ordinary gods. In other words, Noah was now relying on his amazing physical ability to fight. Just like the 16 knights in reverse. No wonder you have some confidence. Although I don't know what kind of power it is, it doesn't seem to be the power of a god. You can train a body that is not weaker than a god, or even better than a god by yourself. No wonder you can become the leader of the generation of god slayers. Susanoo seemed to deliberately say it to Noah and shouted loudly. However, in this case, there is no way to defeat a god. As soon as his words fell, Susanoo stomped on the ground with a force that broke the ground and rushed towards Noah. In his hand, the dark divine sword also slashed out violently. In an instant, several sword shadows were formed in the space. It was still the same divine sword skill as before. However, this time, the trajectory of the sword's shadow suddenly changed halfway, causing the original storm-like offensive to change completely. It became like the rolling waves of the sea, wave after wave, with a kind of endless and continuous entanglement. Noah's brows suddenly wrinkled, but he still picked up the holy spear and violently waved it at the incoming sword's shadow. Clang! Another crisp sound of collision rang out. However, almost in an instant, Noah's expression changed slightly. Because, with amazing strength, the holy spear smashed heavily on Susanu's divine sword, but Susanu's divine sword was not repelled as usual. Instead, it was entangled by a snake, and in a burst of fierce sparks, the spear and the divine sword violently rubbed against each other. Ha 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 ha! Susanu burst out laughing. You have been hit. God Slayer. While laughing, Susanu's hand did not stop, and the divine sword that was entangled with the holy spear suddenly turned into a cold light, and directly shot towards Noah's heart. This attack, there was no room for mercy. If hit, Noah would at least be seriously injured on the spot and lose the ability to fight. Unfortunately, for Noah, this attack was no threat at all. Clang! The sharp pitch-black divine sword directly pierced Noah's heart, and it actually caused a crisp sound of steel hitting steel, and even sparks of friction. This incredible scene finally made Susanu's wild laughter stop on his rock-like face. It was just a moment. Whoosh! He saw, Noah turned around and kicked a powerful kick in the direction of Susanu. Bang! Susanu, who did not have time to react, was directly kicked in the chest with a powerful force, and with a muffled sound, his whole body was kicked out. Whoosh! The terrifying strange force acted on Susanu's body, and his whole body turned into a cannonball, and with a sharp sound of breaking the air, he finally hit the rock wall of a cliff, and directly smashed the cliff wall, and pieces of rocks fell to the ground. Bang, 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 bang! Pieces of rock smashed into the ground, causing a series of heavy muffled sounds to resound. Susanu was directly buried by the rocks, and in an instant, his figure disappeared. However, it was only for a moment. Bang! In the next moment, a storm rose from the center of the pile of rocks, and directly lifted the huge rocks. In the center of the storm, Susanu slowly stood up, raised his head, and shot straight in the direction of Noah like an arrow. You're quite capable, boy. A trace of blood flowed down from the corner of Susanu's mouth. Can you have an invulnerable body? Is that your power? Susanu narrowed his eyes. Invulnerability is usually a power possessed by the god of steel. Could it be that you've killed a steel somewhere? You talk a lot of nonsense, don't tell me you expect the opponent to tell you his ability in a duel? Noah said so, and the corner of his mouth slowly rose. Compared to this, shouldn't you be more concerned about that broken sword of yours? If you don't pay attention to it, it will break. Hearing this, Susanu's face changed, and he suddenly turned his head and looked at the Tian Songyun in his hand, and then, his face changed again. Because on the body of the famous divine sword, there were cracks all over it, and the Tian Songyun looked like a glass that was about to break, and it was too horrible to look at. You also said that my skill is not good. In that case, why should I use this spear? Noah raised the holy spear in his hand and pointed it at Susanu from afar, which was emitting a sacred and ancient aura. That is because this spear exists to bury gods like you. Chapter 14:13. It was the spear of Longinus. It was a god-killing holy spear that only worked on individuals with divinity. The higher the divinity of the opponent, the more damage it could inflict. Someone like Susanu, who was directly created by the father god in Japanese mythology, would have a high divinity. As long as he was stabbed by the spear, there was almost no chance of him surviving. However, although the holy spear was powerful, it would only work if it could hit its target. If it could not hit its target, it would be useless. Therefore, in the past, when Noah used this holy spear, he would first use the Enkidu to bind the opponent, then use the Longinus to attack. However, Noah did not use the Enkidu at the beginning of the battle with Susanu. This was because Susanu had Tian Songyun in his hand. Not only was the divine sword a god relic, but it was also Susanu's subordinate god. It was similar to a demigod with divinity. Therefore, even if Lin Huang did not use the Enkidu to bind it, he would still be able to inflict damage on the divine sword if he used the spear of Longinus. However, Tian Songyun was only a subordinate god. Its divinity was not as high as Susanu's. It was only comparable to a demigod. If its divinity was lower, the damage that the spear of Longinus could inflict would be weaker. However, no matter how weak it was, the damage that was accumulated from the countless collisions would almost reach the critical point of the divine sword. So, Noah waved the holy spear in his hand and stared at Susanu, who had a change of expression. "It's my turn to attack now." Noah raised his empty hand as soon as he finished speaking. Buzz! Suddenly, golden ripples appeared in the air around Noah. Golden light flowed on the surface of the ripples. There were wedges of different shapes at the front of the chains. The crisp sound of the chains could be heard as they shot toward Susanu. Susanu finally couldn't keep his calm anymore. This was because the chains that shot towards him were as threatening as the strange spear in Noah's hand. It would be bad if he was caught by the chains. Susanu's heart was filled with a strong sense of alarm. Immediately, Susanu's body was surrounded by a strong gust of wind. He lifted his strong body and flew up into the air. Amidst the crisp sound of chains clanging against each other, the chains suddenly turned around and rushed toward Susanu, who was flying in the air. Susanu was speechless. He immediately controlled the wind and turned it into a hurricane. It was like a tornado that swept across the sky and retreated at an extremely fast speed. However, the rain of chains didn't give up and continued to chase after Susanu. It was as if the rain of chains was following closely behind Susanu. Therefore, in the stormy weather, the tornado and the chains that were glowing with a dazzling golden light began a chase under the dark clouds. Moreover, both of them were moving at an extremely fast speed. Looking at this scene, even the princess and the monk's expressions began to turn anxious. Those chains. The tyrant stared at the chains that were chasing after the tornado. Is that a type of god relic too? I think so. Ordinary weapons can't threaten a god. However, you can't ignore the weapon that the Devil King is using. The princess was in disbelief as well. What exactly did the Devil King use to be able to use those god relics so easily? Just as the name implied, god relics referred to all the weapons, tools, and tools that God used. Almost every god relic had a unique power that contained wisdom that humans could not replicate. It was a true god's weapon. Usually, only gods could use god relics. Apart from gods, it was impossible for humans to use god relics unless they could find a complicated way to use them. Take Hui Na for example. The reason why she could use the Kusanagi cloud was that she could borrow a god's power. Hui Na could only use the Kusanagi cloud after obtaining the god relic's approval by possessing Susanu's divine power. Humans would not be able to use god relics if they did not use such a roundabout method. However, Noah could use god relics without any hindrance. Could that be the power of an authority too? The princess and the tyrant had the same thought. After all, apart from Erica and Liliana, the rest had no idea what kind of authority Noah had obtained exactly. Even Erica and Liliana only knew half of it. They did not know Noah's authority completely. Therefore, Noah's authority was still a mystery to the rest. Only Alice and Tony had more or less grasped some information. However, even these people had no idea what it was. Noah had tens of thousands of relics that were on par with god relics. Seeing that the Enkidu was unable to catch up to the tornado that was known for its speed, Noah's brows furrowed slightly before he relaxed. Then, let's try this. A gigantic golden ripple spread next to Noah as soon as he was done speaking. A gigantic crossbow appeared from the ripple as if it was pushing something. The expanding mana was sucked into the crossbow, causing the arrows on the crossbow to flash with a star-like brilliance. Go after it. Kill 100 of them, 9 lives. When the real name of the relic was released, the arrow that was shining like starlight vibrated. The starlight on it grew, turning the arrow into a beam of light. The next moment, the beam of light shot out like a shooting star. It twisted in the middle and suddenly split into 9 beams of light that looked like a dragon, shooting into the sky. Susanoo, who was dodging the attack, was shocked. He turned his head and looked in a certain direction. 9 laser beams pierced through the space and flew towards Susanoo at a much faster speed than the golden chains. They circled around each other and shot towards Susanoo at a much faster speed. Susanoo's eyes widened. He quickly controlled the tornado that was circling around his body. The tornado that was flying in the air suddenly changed direction and retreated to the side. However, Susanoo did not know that dodging the attack was useless against this relic. Kill 100 of them, 9 lives. This noble phantasm was the noble phantasm of Hercules, who had a history with Noah. In Greek mythology, Hercules was given 12 impossible tasks. One of the tasks was to destroy the sea monster that wreaked havoc in the world, the Hydra. In the legend, Hercules finally overcame all kinds of difficulties and killed the Hydra with a bow and arrow. The bow and arrow that Hercules used to kill the Hydra was kill 100 of them, 9 lives. It could turn the arrow into a beam of light and then into 9 tracking lasers. It was a relic that could even kill a fantasy breed with 1 shot. Therefore, the beams of light suddenly changed direction, pierced through the air, separated the tornado, and suddenly caught up with Susanoo at an indescribable speed. What? Susanoo was shocked, and then his face became ferocious. Don't underestimate me. With a violent roar, Susanoo raised the Kusanagi sword in his hand and slashed 9 consecutive times at the incoming beams of light. The flashing saber light collided with the incoming beams of light. Bang! 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 In an instant, the 9 saber lights collided with the 9 beams of light, stirring up intense flames and shock waves in all directions. However, not only did Susanoo not show any joy, but his pupils shrank. Whoosh! A figure rushed out of the intense flames and shock waves and flashed in front of Susanoo. You're the one who underestimated me, you bastard god. The god-killing holy spear turned into a red light and stabbed out violently. Chapter 14:14. Whoosh! The holy spear turned into a red flash of light, and like a bolt of lightning, it pierced towards Susanoo's direction, and with a sharp sound of breaking the air, it shot towards Susanoo's heart. At this moment, the sense of crisis in Susanoo's heart surged like a tidal wave, and a look of horror appeared in his eyes. However, that was to be expected. As mentioned before, with Susanoo's divinity, once he was hit by the spear of Longinus, he would definitely die. At this moment, Susanoo's heart was filled with the shadow of death. At this critical moment, the black saber in Susanoo's hand suddenly trembled, and it didn't pass through Susanoo's hand. Instead, it lifted Susanoo's hand up into the air. At the same time, the holy spear, which turned into a red flash of light, pierced towards the black divine sword. Bang! The divine sword, which was full of scars like broken glass, finally turned into pieces under the holy spear's attack, and scattered in all directions. As one of Susanoo's subordinate gods, Tian Songyun sacrificed himself to block a fatal blow for the overgod. Ha! Only then did Susanoo react. He let out a roar, and the storm around his body suddenly exploded, turning into a substantial shockwave that shook the surrounding area. Noah was knocked back by the shockwave caused by the explosion. His footsteps kept moving in the air. After retreating a few hundred meters, he finally stopped. Boom! The dark clouds in the sky suddenly flashed with lightning, causing the lightning to fall from the clouds and flash through the space between Noah and Susanoo. With this storm as the background, Noah and Susanoo were facing each other in the air. Sacrificed your sword? Noah said sarcastically. What? If you want to, you can still do it, right? You don't have to laugh at me, boy. Just now, Tian Songyun voluntarily blocked the attack for me, but the so-called subordinate god is supposed to support the over-god, so I don't think it's shameful. Susanoo still had a violent smile on his face, but there was no trace of a smile in his eyes. On the contrary, you didn't show any mercy at all, and you really wanted to kill me, which surprised me a little. Didn't you say that you didn't want to be merciful from the start? Noah glanced at Susanoo. I clearly remember that after you broke through my defense, you aimed your sword at my heart. That can't be helped. Susanoo didn't hide anything. Fighting against a human hero who can kill a god, I don't have the confidence to win in the future. Then I'm the same, right? Noah said lightly. At this time, when I can't use my true power, I also don't have the confidence to defeat you if I show mercy. Oh. Susanoo raised his eyebrows. In other words, as long as you don't show mercy, you have the confidence to defeat me? Hearing this, Noah didn't answer immediately. Instead, he curled his lips and raised the holy lance in his hand, pointing it at Susanoo from afar. Didn't the attack just now fully prove this point? Yes. The attack just now had fully proved this point. Even if Noah can't use his authority yet, with his current strength, as long as he uses his full strength, he can defeat a god. Today, Noah has been reborn, and his strength is no longer the same as when he first came to this world. When he first came to this world, Noah didn't become a god slayer, and he didn't have the authority of a god. After Tony used the power of the demon sword, he was defeated in a single attack. Now, Noah was much stronger than he was back then. Even without the authority of a god, Noah still has the power to defeat a god slayer and a god of disobedience. This is a true rebirth. Susanoo didn't know that Noah didn't use his authority from the beginning to the end. However, just now, Noah did almost kill Susanoo, which fully proved the fact that if he uses his full strength, he can defeat Susanoo with 100% certainty. However, this fact made Susanoo laugh out loud. Good. Very good. In that case. Then I won't be polite. As soon as the words fell, Susanoo's body suddenly surged with a vast amount of curse power. The tsunami-like violent and rich curse power turned into a substantial storm, accompanied by Susanoo's raised hands, and while rotating, it gathered around Susanoo's body. The violent storm even formed a raging tornado, running down from the sky, connecting the whole world, and spinning crazily. Under such circumstances, the dark clouds in the sky seemed to be stirred up as if they were boiling, and the rock formations on the ground were directly dug up. Trees and gravel were directly uprooted and constantly swept into the storm, causing the storm to reach a diameter of hundreds of meters in an instant. In the center of the storm, Susanoo raised his hands and shouted loudly. God Slayer! Take the final blow that I will use up all of my divine power. Hearing Susanoo's words and feeling the terrible curse power contained in the terrifying storm, Noah's face gradually became serious, and he murmured. It seems that this is indeed your final blow. Susanoo's power is definitely not inferior to Velislana and Mercado. In other words, this storm god is also a god of the highest level. For a deity of such a level, a blow that was charged with all the curse power in his body was equally dangerous to Noah without using his authority. If that's the case, I have to use all my strength. After saying such a sentence, Noah threw away the holy spear in his hand and let it be swallowed by the golden ripples. Immediately, another golden ripple fluctuated from Noah's side. Fortunately, this is the secluded world, a world formed by the combination of different spaces. As Noah's voice sounded, a strange-shaped sword slowly emerged from the golden ripple. Noah stretched out his hand, tightly grasped the hilt of the strange-shaped sword, and suddenly pulled it out. So, even if this sword can cut the world, it can only cut the space. It won't hurt the world itself, right? Noah raised the strange-shaped sword high above his head. Then wake up. Because of your power. Unless it's a last resort, I won't use you. It's rare to have such a stage. Cherish it. Show me all of your power. The treasure artifact named Obedient Parting Sword, EA, suddenly trembled. Wang. In the trembling sound, the three blades that made up the sword suddenly rotated, and set off a red wind pressure. The red wind pressure became more and more intense, and finally, it turned into a red storm, and also swept down from the sky, sweeping the earth. Suddenly, one red and one gray tornado directly reflected between heaven and earth, stirring up the dark clouds, cutting open the fragile earth, and letting the earth-shattering wind wreak havoc in the entire space. The princess and the monk had already retreated, and even retreated to the edge of this space, looking at the two storms that ran between heaven and earth. Their faces were full of shock. So you're also the controller of the storm? God Slayer. Susanoo laughed wildly. Very good. Very good. Is your wind stronger, or is my wind stronger? Let's have a competition. After saying that, Susanoo raised his hands high, and heavily waved them down. Whoosh! The raging gray storm turned into an impact, and as if it was trying to break through the sky, it carried a crazy whistling sound, and violently shot towards Noah's direction. Seeing this, the corner of Noah's mouth lifted, and a flash of light suddenly flashed in his eyes. The star of heaven and earth's origin, Enoma Elish. The obedient parting sword, Ea, which was spinning at an extreme speed, was fiercely stabbed out by Noah. Wang! The red wind pressure condensed into a monstrous red storm, and along the way, it cut open space, and cut open heaven and earth, and brought along a pitch-black spatial fault, to meet the oncoming gray storm. Dong! As if shaking heaven and earth, the roar resounded in every corner. Chapter 14-15. Boom! In the storm, the red storm and the gray storm suddenly collided, causing an earth-shattering roar, setting off an extremely terrifying impact. The red wind pressure and the gray wind pressure turned into countless chaotic airflows, crazily flowing in all directions. Bang 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 bang. Everything that was swept by the wind pressure, no matter if it was trees, rocks, cliffs, or the ground, exploded, turning into fragments that were directly swept into the wind pressure and annihilated into powder. Kacha kacha kacha. In mid-air, the space was like a fragile piece of glass. Under the raging red wind pressure, it cracked and shattered. Wang! Just like that, the pitch-black spatial fault suddenly appeared wherever the red storm passed. It trembled repeatedly and devoured everything that was swept into it, annihilating everything into nothingness, including the gray storm. Almost at the moment of collision, the gray storm was suddenly entangled by the red storm, and was suddenly pulled into the spatial fault by the red storm, disappearing into the pitch-black spatial crack. What? Susanoo's face was filled with horror. Noya, who was holding the 3 blades in his hand, continuously spun and released a red wind pressure. He looked at Susanoo's horrified expression and sneered. The controller of the storm? That's not right. The real ability of the noble phantasm was not to control the storm. Instead, it was to form a spatial fault, and then split the world, reproducing the scene of hell before the birth of heaven and earth. So, it should be the creator of hell. After saying that, Noah was like a raging torrent of magical power, pouring it into the noble phantasm. Boom! An even more violent red wind pressure suddenly expanded from the point where the 3 blades of the Sword of Guile parting, Ea, were connected. The wind pressure expanded and turned into a storm that pierced through space. While it tore through the space barrier, it carried along a dark space fault and swept violently towards Susanoo's direction. The pitch-black spatial fault that seemed to have divided the whole sky into 2 suddenly became like a pitch-black galaxy, crossing the sky and falling on the huge gray storm. The gray storm was directly crushed by the pitch-black spatial fault, turning into a turbulent flow, and was pulled into the spatial fault, disappearing without a trace. Then, the red wind pressure gathered into an even more terrifying storm, and like a red tornado breaking through the sky, it violently shot in the direction of Susanoo. At this moment, in Susanoo's heart, a fatal sense of crisis exploded. The shadow of death suddenly shrouded Susanoo's heart. His pupils shrank to the size of a needle tip. His resolute face was filled with horror and despair. After exhausting all of his divine power, Susanoo could only watch helplessly as the spatial fault that seemed to have divided the sky and the earth into 2 halves, as if creating a road leading to the underworld, rushed towards him. In his heart, there was even a touch of despair. In such a situation, the red wind pressure still tore the space apart like glass, causing the space fragments to splatter in all directions. On one hand, the red wind pressure divided the sky and the earth into 2 halves, and on the other hand, the spatial fault that symbolizes the underworld was approaching in the direction of Susanoo. It didn't take long for the spatial fault that divided the sky and the earth into 2 halves to arrive in front of Susanoo. Susanoo, who has exhausted all of his divine power, could only stare blankly at the spatial fault that filled his entire field of vision, and his whole body was frozen in place, unable to move at all. Just when Susanoo was about to be engulfed by the red wind and annihilated by the spatial fault that divided the sky and the earth, two figures suddenly appeared on both sides of Susanoo, grabbed Susanoo, and then disappeared in place. In the next second, the red wind pressure swept past the spot where Susanoo had been standing. The pitch-black spatial fault also sliced this part of the world in half, and it didn't slow down in the slightest as it flashed past like the Milky Way until it reached the end of the world. Wherever the pitch-black spatial fault passed, the surrounding space would crack open, making the entire sky look like a spider web, filled with cracks. After an unknown amount of time had passed, the red wind pressure that had ripped open the space and created a spatial fault gradually dissipated and slowly disappeared. What was left was the spatial fault that seemed to have divided the entire sky into two halves, spanning across the two ends of the sky, and it didn't calm down for a long time. As for the ground, under the raging wind pressure, it has long been turned into ruins. The original mountain forest and stream had long been completely shattered and disappeared without a trace. Wang, the three spinning blades that were spinning at an extremely fast speed slowly stopped, and the red wind pressure completely disappeared. Noah slowly pulled back the Guili sword, that he had thrust out. Looking at the huge, pitch-black spatial rift that stretched across the entire horizon and split the entire sky into two, there was no joy on his face. After being strengthened by the dragon's sovereignty of the sun, Noah's strength has been raised to another level. Using such a terrifying amount of magic to release the power of the good separation sword, to cut open the entire world and achieve the true creation of the heavens and earth, that would not be strange at all. Of course, there is also the reason why this space is only a part of secluded world, and it is not as big as a real world. However, after being strengthened by the dragon's sovereignty of the sun, using the power of the sword to release the power of the sword, it is not strange that it can directly cut an island in half. Then, there is only one question left. In the end, did we still let him escape like this? After saying this, Noah turned around and looked at the corner of the ground that has been turned into ruins. There, three figures suddenly appeared without any warning. Susanoo's knees went soft, and he knelt on the ground, his face full of fear as he violently gasped for breath. Beside him, the princess and the monk's faces were also pale, and their eyes were filled with shock. Just now, if the princess and the monk did not use the special teleportation method of secluded world to save Susanoo in time, at this moment, Susanoo would have disappeared without a trace. Whether it was the dignified and polite princess, the rebellious monk, or the unscrupulous Susanoo, none of them expected this. To think that this battle would end so miserably, announcing their defeat. The highest level god, in the hands of a single god slayer, was reduced to the point where he needed to be saved to survive. It has to be said that this is the most practical way to slap the face of the previous few people who said that it would be difficult to determine the victor. Just like this, under the gaze of the three people, Noah slowly floated down from the sky and landed on a broken rock. With the dark space fault as the background, he looked at Susanoo. What's wrong? Not fighting anymore? Susanoo's face became extremely ugly. The storm god, who is famous for his violent temperament, wants to continue to fight with Noah for 300 more rounds. However, when he glanced at the strange sword in Noah's hand, a trace of fear involuntarily appeared in Susanoo's eyes. To be able to make a god show fear in his eyes, this is simply an unprecedented feat. However, by relying on the most primitive ancient sword and the sun's sovereignty of the sun, Noah has achieved this feat. Not to mention Susanoo, even the rebellious tyrant was speechless. He had a bitter look on his face as if he had eaten Chinese gold thread. Only the princess, who was frightened by Noah's power, breathed a sigh of relief. At least, Noah didn't blame them for saving Susanoo, right? Otherwise, Noah only needed to strike once more, and the three of them would probably not be able to survive. Just when the princess was about to step forward and say something, something strange happened. Boom! In the sky, in the deepest part of the dark space fault, a deafening loud noise resounded. Immediately afterward, a burst of laughter shook the air from inside. Ha 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 ha. I, old sun, am free. Chapter 14:16. Ha 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 ha. I, old sun, am free. When such a burst of laughter rang out from the pitch-black spatial fault that spanned the entire sky and entered the ears of everyone present, everyone was stunned. Immediately, before Noah could react, Susanoo, the monk, and the princess seemed to have thought of something, and their expressions changed. Damn it! The monk shouted with a shocked face. Could it be that the monkey came out? Impossible. Susanoo immediately shook his head. That monkey should be imprisoned by our curse. It's impossible for it to come out without anyone unlocking the curse. The princess also had the same opinion as Susanoo, but then she was slightly surprised. She raised her head and looked at the pitch-black spatial fault that spanned across the sky. She spoke with some uncertainty. Could it be because of the power of Rakshasa King that the Lord God escaped? Only then did Susanoo and the monk react. They both turned their heads and looked at Noah. A god relic that can create spatial faults. Susanoo stared at the Gwaili sword, in Noah's hand and murmured. Could it be, you? What kind of power does your god relic have? The monk pointed to the Gwaili sword, in Noah's hand with a hoarse voice. Could it be that the god relic can really cut open space? What are you still talking about now? Noah frowned. Do you still need me to prove something to you? Hearing this, the three transcendent beings in the hidden world, including the princess, all laughed bitterly. This is really a double whammy. Susanoo raised his head and looked at the pitch-black spatial fault that spanned across the sky again and said in a deep voice. It seems that after the sword cut open this space, its power also spread to another space. And that space happened to be the monkey's cage. The monk was speechless. As a result, the wind pressure that can even cut open space also cut open the curse that bound the monkey? That's the only way. The princess nodded. As for the truth, we only need to investigate a little to find out. After saying that, the princess turned around and bent down gracefully. She scooped up a handful of water from a crack in the messy ground. Her red lips moved slightly as she chanted. Ancient serpent's wisdom, please show me the truth of the other side. The princess splashed the water in her hands in front of her. Immediately, the water that was sprayed out dispersed in mid-air, turning into a cloud of mist. The mist then twisted and converged into a screen. The scene presented on the screen was a magnificent palace like the Forbidden City in China. However, such a palace was forcefully split into two by a pitch-black spatial fault that suddenly appeared. It was as if it had fallen into the earth's crust, collapsing with a loud rumble. In such a collapsed palace, a golden light flashed and flew into the sky. In the distance, a golden cloud flew over from one side of the sky at an astonishing speed. The golden light that soared into the sky blasted into the sky, crossed the golden cloud, and turned into a figure. The figure somersaulted and flipped onto the golden cloud with extreme flexibility. Immediately, the golden cloud carried the figure. Like a stream of light, it wandered in the sky for a while. Finally, it rushed into the pitch-black spatial fault. Oh no! Susanoo cursed out loud. The monkey is coming. The princess and the monk had the same lamenting expression as if it was a blessing and not a curse. They raised their heads and looked at the horizon. Noah frowned. He also raised his head and looked at the huge pitch-black spatial fault across the sky. There, a stream of light suddenly appeared, flew out, and came above Noah's group at an astonishing speed. It seems that there are traces left behind by a battle between young and vigorous men. Well done. It couldn't be better to welcome me, the fighting Buddha, in such a way. Such a voice spread from above the golden cloud. Immediately afterward, Noah saw it. Above the golden cloud, a figure was gradually exposed in the air. Noah was more or less surprised when he saw the full appearance of the figure. Although the figure's body outline was humanoid, it did not have a human appearance. It had a sharp mouth, monkey cheeks, and its entire body was covered in dense golden hair. It had a furry tail behind it, and it was wearing an outfit that looked like something that would only appear in Peking opera, which people would call damn. The pair of eyes were bloodshot. The whites of the eyes were red, and the pupils were golden. It was an ape. The ape that the princess called the god. Of course, that was not the other party's name. It was just a temporary title. The god with the appearance of an ape had a more resounding name. What? Old guys? Why do you all look so miserable? The ape said such a sentence in a curious tone rather than ridicule. When you locked me in the curse, you should be more domineering. How did you become like this now? What's wrong? Monkey? Susanoo stood up with difficulty and stared at the ape standing above the golden cloud. If you are here to seek revenge on us, even if you become like this, I can continue to accompany you. No, no, no. Revenge is something that only mortals do. If you defeat me in a fair battle, then as the fighting Buddha, in order to show my bravery and strength, it is natural for me to seek revenge on you. The ape scratched its furry face and said so. But revenge for such a trivial matter is not something that a well-known existence like me should do. Such a declaration was simply preposterous. No. It should be said that the only people who could treat something like imprisonment as a trivial matter were these gods. Lord God Ape. The princess looked at the ape with quiet eyes. You've finally gotten out too? Yes, the descendant of the snake god. I, old son, can finally see the light of day again. The ape straightened its tall body and spoke loudly. Also, don't call me Lord God Ape. I am not Lord God Ape, but a person who is with the sky. The ape's pair of eyes flashed with a frightening look, making the golden pupils emit a bright brilliance. I am the Monkey King born in the stone, the fierce fighting Buddha. A brilliance suddenly flashed in the ape's hand. The brilliance condensed into a long strip and finally turned into a staff made of steel. Holding the heavy steel staff in his hand, the ape's body surged with amazing curse power. His voice vibrated like a sound wave. My surname is Sun, and my name is Wukong. I call myself the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal. The surging curse power surged from the god named Sun Wukong in all directions like waves, causing the surrounding air to begin to produce a trace of chaos. The earth-shattering name made the expressions of Susanoo, the monk, and the princess become serious. Noah also held the Gwili sword, in his hand, and a burst of surprise surged in his heart. The Great Sage, Heaven's Equal. It was an existence that didn't even need to be explained. The name of Sun Wukong was more well-known than anything in China and Japan, which were close to the east. Why would the ape god, who had once broken into hell and turned the heavenly palace upside down, appear in such a place? Just as Noah was surprised by this, the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, who was standing on a golden cloud in midair, suddenly turned his eyes and looked in the direction of Noah. Kid over there, you're not an ordinary person. Old son, I can feel the aura of an enemy on you. So that's why. You're the god slayer. You're the one who made the wind god suffer. At this moment, Noah felt it. The Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, released his fighting intent towards him. It was you who helped me get out of trouble, wasn't it? Then, in order to repay you, let me be your opponent. Without Noah's consent, there was no time for him to react. The ape god, who claimed to be the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, looked up to the sky and laughed. Riding the golden cloud called the somersault cloud, he turned into a stream of light and rushed in the direction of Noah at an amazing speed. Whoosh! The steel staff with a strong wind cut through the sky, like a windmill. In the blink of an eye, it was heavily swung toward Noah's head. The inexplicable signal of war made Noah's eyes narrow. Chapter 14:17. Although he didn't know why Great Sage Equaling Heaven suddenly appeared, according to the dialogue between Susanoo, the monk, and the princess, Noah still more or less guessed some reasons. For some reason, Great Sage Equaling Heaven seemed to be imprisoned in one of the spaces in secluded world by Susanoo, the monk, and the princess using some kind of curse. That space was the space where the princess used the curse to show that Great Sage Equaling Heaven escaped from the palace and was cut by the dark space fault. Due to Noah's use of the good parting sword, the space that Susanoo occupied was directly cut open by the noble phantasm that could cut open the world. At that time, the wind pressure of the sword of Gwili, just affected the space where Great Sage Equaling Heaven was imprisoned, After all, secluded world was a multidimensional world composed of different spaces. The fact that people here could teleport through imagination proved that there was a connection between these isolated spaces. Therefore, Noah used the sword of Gwai Li, Ea, to cut open this space, which happened to open the way to the space where great sage equaling heaven was imprisoned. As a result, the wind pressure of the sword of Gwai Li, Ea, also cut open the space where great sage equaling heaven was imprisoned, and even cut off the curse that imprisoned great sage equaling heaven, allowing great sage equaling heaven to see the light again. Then, great sage equaling heaven came to this space through the space fault caused by the sword of Gwai Li, Ea, from the space where he was imprisoned. In other words, although he didn't know the specific details, Noah seemed to have coincidentally released the god of disobedience that Susanu, the monk, and the princess imprisoned with great difficulty, allowing the god named Great Sage equaling heaven to appear in this space. Yes. Great Sage equaling heaven was a god of disobedience. He was not a god like Susanu who lived in seclusion in secluded world. Instead, it went against the myths and became a body that went against the Tao. It was a true god of disobedience who was dominated by arrogance. Ha 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 ha. Come on. God Slayer. Look at my staff. With a hearty laugh, Excellency Ape, who was as tall as the sky, stepped on the somersault cloud and rushed to Noah at an amazing speed. He waved his cudgel, which squeezed the air clean and brought a whistling wind. Feeling the violent wind pressure from the attack, Noah quickly raised the discerning sword in his hand. Clang! The sound of steel colliding with steel resounded, stirring up a powerful shockwave that spread in all directions. The terrifying force from Sun Wukong's steel rod smashed into the Gwai Li sword, Ea, causing Noah's hand to go numb as he let out a groan. That terrifying strength came entirely from the great sage, heaven's equals shocking weight, causing Noah to involuntarily click his tongue. So heavy, of course it's heavy. The great sage smiled proudly. The Rui Jingu Bang of the great sage, heaven's equal, is made of divine iron. It is a divine needle that can even calm the sea. It weighs 13,500 kilograms. With this iron rod, I have swept the underworld, modified the book of life and death, and disturbed the heavenly court. I have beaten 100,000 celestial soldiers and celestial generals. Therefore, God Slayer, you should be proud to be able to take Sun Wukong's cudgel. After saying that, the great sage, heaven's equal, once again raised the Jingu Bang in his hand high above his head and waved it mercilessly at Noah with the force of splitting the earth. With just a wave, the atmosphere was directly torn apart by the simple steel rod, setting off a violent airflow. As the Jingu Bang waved down, everything was squeezed clean. Just like in the legends. Sun Wukong's Jingu Bang had an extremely amazing weight. Even Noah, who had used magic to strengthen his arm strength and the LV5 ability value, felt that it was difficult to handle. He did not choose to take it and quickly retreated. Bang! The golden-hooped cudgel, which did not lose its momentum, landed directly on the ground. The ground, which was already in ruins, suddenly exploded. It was as if it had been hit by a meteorite. It sank layer by layer until it turned into a crater with a diameter of hundreds of meters before it stopped. Don't run. God Slayer. The great sage, heaven's equals monkey face, was full of joy. Riding the somersault cloud, he turned into a streamer and rushed in the direction of Noah. After a while, he caught up with Noah, who was retreating, and waved his cudgel again. Noah only felt that his vision was blurred. Sun Wukong, who was riding the somersault cloud, flashed in front of him and waved the heavy iron rod at his head. Not only was his strength amazing, but his speed was also terrifying. However, that was to be expected. In Journey to the West, the great sage, heaven's equal, Sun Wukong, had 5 most outstanding strengths. First, he held the Rui Jingu Bang, which weighed 13,500 kilograms. Second, he had an indestructible body, which was comparable to King Kong and was extremely hard. Third, he could summon the somersault cloud, which could fly 108,000 miles with a somersault. Fourth, he had 72 transformations, which was all-encompassing and ever-changing. 5. the fiery eyes of gold that can identify any demons and ghosts, and see through any illusions. The first strength gave Sun Wukong a terrifying attack power. The second strength gave Sun Wukong a terrifying immortal body. The third strength gave Sun Wukong a terrifying speed and agility. Together with the fourth and fifth strength, this excellency ape almost had no weakness. The speed that Sun Wukong showed on the somersault cloud was the so-called God speed. Noah, who also had the God speed authority, naturally understood how illegal this authority was. Without the mind-eye skill, it was simply an incomprehensible power. Fortunately, although Noah did not have the mind-eye skill, he had superb sensing ability. Therefore, when Sun Wukong retreated from the Godspeed world and waved an amazing blow at him, Noah reacted in time. Blow him away. Guili sword, EA. The dark black rotating blade, which was covered by red lines, suddenly began to rotate, causing red wind pressure to surge out. It was like a whirlpool that began to rotate wildly. Bang! Like a wild whip, one of the red wind pressure, which was spinning wildly like a whirlpool, swept heavily on the chest of the Monkey King, who was about to swing the rod down, causing a heavy muffled sound. The great sage, Heaven's equal, let out a muffled groan as he was sent flying. He landed heavily on the ground, creating a deep pit. Ouch! It hurts. Excellency Ape, who was riding on the somersault cloud, covered his chest and made a strange cry. God Slayer, did you break my invincible Vajra body so easily? Taking a closer look, Sun Wukong, who was swept by the wind pressure of the Guili sword, EA, because of his careless attack, had a hideous wound full of blood on his chest. It was as if it was going to cut him diagonally, from his shoulder to the side of his waist. Although Sun Wukong did not use his full strength, he was swept by the wind pressure that could cut the world. Even the immortal body, which was known as the indestructible body, was easily broken. Oh, no, I was careless. The Monkey King seemed to have finally calmed down. Because I was too happy to escape, I didn't consider my condition and rushed over excitedly. In the end, I was seriously injured. It's really embarrassing. Fine, I'll retreat here first. After I recover from my injuries and recover my divine power, I'll come and fight you again. After that, the Monkey King rode on the somersault cloud, turned into a golden light, and flew toward the dark space vault above the sky. God Slayer. We will meet again someday. With that, the great sage, Heaven's equal, disappeared into the pitch-black spatial vault along with the golden light. What's going on? Noah looked at this scene, almost stunned. Come and go as you please. Fight as you please and escape as you please. Do you have to be so shameless? From the very beginning, Noah was in a state of confusion when the great sage, Heaven's equal, found fault with him. Then, he inexplicably received the other party's attack. When Sun Wukong was careless, the Monkey King used the wind pressure of the Guili sword, EA, to sweep him, and then the Monkey King fled again. Such willful and reckless behavior was like a typhoon, and Noah could not help but feel a little confused. However, Noah understood again. This was the mischievous Excellency Ape who had once made a scene in the heavenly palace and overturned the underworld. In any case, Noah had to admit a fact. I've been targeted by an incredible god. Sui Xiong murmured. Chapter 14:18. It wasn't until the great sage equaling heaven disappeared into the dark spatial vault that Susanoo, the monk, and the princess looked at each other. It seems that Monkey King should have returned to the real world. Princess said with some worry. This time, the people on the ground will have to suffer a great disaster again. The appearance of the god of disobedience would bring great disaster to the world on the ground. Monkey King, was the god of war with boundless magical power. If he became a god of disobedience and allowed himself to be manipulated by arrogance, ordinary humans could only suffer. That was also a matter of course. Princess was probably worried about this, right? The kindness of worrying about the country and the people obviously came from her heart. Compared with the kind-hearted princess, Susanoo and the tyrant were quite irresponsible. They said such words as if they didn't have a care in the world. Even so, Don't humans have a saying that only by experiencing hardships can one stand out? Even if it causes a disaster, it's just a small matter. With the appearance of a disobedient god, the god slayers will naturally be attracted like sharks that have smelled blood. That monkey will be dealt with sooner or later, won't it? Hearing the heartless words of Susanoo and Monk, Noah frowned tightly and looked coldly at the two guys who he didn't have a good impression of at all. You are the ones who imprisoned Excellency Ape. Now that he has escaped and returned to the real world, he will definitely turn the world upside down after he recovers from his injury. It is not surprising even if there are heavy casualties. Only you guys who don't take human life seriously can sleep soundly, right? No, even if you say so, we have done everything we should do. Susanoo said without a trace of worry and guilt. What's more, although the curse of imprisoning the monkey was completed by us, the ones who really benefited were you humans. Now that something has happened, you want to push the blame to us. How can there be such a good thing? We humans are the ones who benefited? Noah's frown deepened. What the hell is going on? Hearing Noah's blunt questioning, which was almost in the form of an order, the rebellious monk immediately wanted to mock him. However, before that, Noah glanced at the monk and said indifferently, "You'd better not say anything I don't like to hear. Otherwise, I don't mind giving you another stab." After saying that, Noah gently raised the Gwaili sword, in his hand. The red wind pressure that lingered around the sword carried an aura that made one's heart palpitate, causing the monk's shriveled face to twitch slightly. He could only swallow the sarcasm that was about to come out of his mouth. At this point, no matter how rebellious the monk was, he finally understood one thing. That was, it would not benefit him at all if he spoke too fast. These transcendental beings were not ordinary humans, nor were they ordinary godslayers. Instead, it could use all kinds of god relics that only existed in myths and legends. It could even open up heaven and earth. It could even cut open the curse binding the god of disobedience. In addition, the other party was not in existence that would swallow insult and humiliation. He would do whatever he wanted. If he continued to provoke him, perhaps the next time he would be the one to face the world-splitting sword strike, he would be the one to face it. Even the monk, who had become a Buddha physically, would no longer have any sense of superiority at this time. The god slayer in front of them must not be provoked. This was the monk's truest feeling now. Similarly, it was Susanoo's feeling. Under such circumstances, even Susanoo seemed to have swallowed his bitterness. He closed his mouth tightly, for fear that if he spoke rudely again, he would really be killed by Noah's sword. Only the princess took a step forward and whispered to Noah softly. "The great sage is actually steel that we summoned to slay the dragon and snake." Steel? Noah sighed aloud. Sure enough, Sun Wukong is also steel. In Journey to the West, Sun Wukong, the great sage equaling heaven, was a monkey that jumped out of a stone. After learning the magical powers of heaven and earth, he caused havoc in the heavenly palace and was imprisoned in Taishang Laojuan's 8 trigrams furnace. However, after being calcined by the furnace fire, he obtained an indestructible body and fiery golden eyes. All of these myths were closely related to steel. If Sun Wukong, the stone monkey, was regarded as the stone itself, that is, the ore itself, after being calcined by the furnace fire, he obtained a steel-like body when he came out. Wasn't that the process of forming a sharp weapon of steel, which was the forging process of a sword? The so-called steel god referred to the gods who slayed dragons and killed snakes and held weapons made of steel in their hands. Their existence itself was like a living sword. There was a legend that was completely consistent with the forging process of the sword, which was the best proof that the great sage equaling heaven was steel. Moreover, in Journey to the West, Sun Wukong subdued the dragon and turned it into the Mount of Tang Seng on the way to the Buddhist scriptures, which was the legend of the dragon horse. The story of breaking into the dragon palace and taking away the Rui Jingu Bang proved that this excellency ape had a deep relationship with the dragon and snake. In this way, the great sage equaling heaven was naturally the steel god who slayed dragons and snakes. In order to eliminate the dragon and snake that appeared in Japan, Susanoo, the monk, and the princess worked together to summon the great sage equaling heaven and then imprisoned this excellency ape with a great spell. As long as a dragon and snake, the mythological beast of the dragon and snake, and the goddess of the earth, who symbolized the dragon and snake, appeared in Japan, the three of them would undo this spell and let the great sage equaling heaven go to slay the dragon and snake. Of course, after completing the task, the curse would reseal the great sage equaling heaven. Unfortunately, now, this curse had been directly cut off by Noah with the Genesis divine sword, and it could no longer be restored. In addition to the purpose of slaying the dragon and killing the snake, we have also established a connection to the space where the great sage is imprisoned in the island country on the ground. The great sage's ancestral temple is protected by a strong barrier and a sealing spell. If there is a witch who can use a spell to weaken the seal, then we can use the power of the great sage, heaven's equal to heaven to a certain extent. The princess tried her best to explain to Noah. In this case, the humans on the ground can more or less gain some benefits. So, Susanoo said that it was the humans who benefited? It's just that you didn't specifically imprison a disobedient god for the sake of humans, right? Noah looked directly at the princess. After all, the power that the great sage equaling heaven can lend to humans, you transcendental existences can do the same, right? You are right, the foreign Rakshasa king. The princess smiled bitterly. Our main purpose is to slaughter the dragon and snake that appeared in the island country. Why did you specifically summon the god of steel, who slays dragons and snakes, to eliminate the dragon and snake that appeared in the island country? Noah directly approached the main topic. It has something to do with the strongest steel that you have been very concerned about, right? Yes. The princess closed her eyes. Dragons and serpents can stimulate steel. Sometimes they awaken steel from its slumber, and sometimes they bestow steel with power. In order to prevent steel from waking up from its slumber, we summon the gods who can slay dragons and serpents. Just like Perseus in Naples, he appeared because of the appearance of the dragon beast, proving that the dragon and snake could awaken the sleeping steel. After Susanoo annihilated Orochi, he obtained the Kusanagi sword from its tail, which also proved that the dragon and snake could give steel the power. In order to prevent the strongest steel from waking up from his slumber in the island nation, these three transcendent existences had done so many things. That lord is the last king to appear in the world, known as the last king. At the same time, he is also the strongest steel. He can annihilate the demon king and become the natural enemy of the god slayer. The princess said quietly. Letting that lord wake up again will not do much good to the world. We unanimously decided to let that lord continue to sleep. But this is also a very risky approach, Noah said calmly. The monkey has now broken away from your curse and returned to its disobedient body. What are you going to do? Fortunately, the king who can rival the great sage is also on this island country. The princess looked at Noah with great sincerity. The foreign Rakshasa king, please stop the great sage. Sure enough, things have turned out like this. Chapter 14:19. Rumble. In one of the spaces in Yushur, the forbidden city-like palace that originally imprisoned the great sage, heaven's equal was still collapsing like the sky was falling and the earth was cracking. The dark space fault that split the entire palace into two halves was directly imprinted on the ground, making the palace seem to fall into a swamp. It slowly disintegrated and collapsed, turned into rubble, and was gradually swallowed up. If this continued, it was only a matter of time before the palace was completely destroyed. However, this palace was originally used to imprison the curse of the great sage, heaven's equal. Now that the great sage, heaven's equal had escaped, this palace was no longer useful. It might not be a bad thing for him to retreat after accomplishing his mission here. In the dark space fault, at a certain moment, a stream of light flew out from it like a meteor, crossing the sky and stopping in mid-air, revealing its full appearance. It was none other than Noah. Looking around and watching the palace that was gradually swallowed up by the dark space fault, Noah muttered to himself. Is this the space that imprisoned Sun Wukong? Where is the exit? According to the princess, the space used to imprison Sun Wukong was separated from the rest of the space in Yushur by a powerful enchantment and sealing curse. There was no way to reach it by teleportation. Therefore, after the great sage, Heaven's Equal, escaped, he used the space fault opened by the Good Parting Sword, EA, to move to the space where Susanoo was located. Noah also used the same method to come to this space. He came here mainly because although this space was separated from the rest of the space in Yushur, there was an exit that connected to the Shinjun temple used to worship the great sage, Heaven's Equal. The people in this world used this exit to let Witch Yuan, who could use the curse to weaken the curse, open a hole in the enchantment and seal. She entered here and communicated with the imprisoned great sage, Heaven's Equal, so as to borrow the power of the great sage, Heaven's Equal. Then, whenever dragons and snakes appeared on the ground, the great sage, Heaven's Equal, who had been unbound by the curse, would also go to the world through this exit. He would kill the dragons and snakes, complete the mission, and then be brought back by the curse through this exit to be sealed again. Therefore, using this exit, Noah and the great sage, Heaven's Equal, could return to the modern realm. Don't think that just because Susanoo had casually pulled Noah into secluded world, he would be able to let anyone enter and leave as they pleased. If one did not use some special method, the door between the hidden world and the present world would not open. The reason why Susanoo was able to bring Noah here was mainly because of his witch and god relic in this world. With the help of the witch, the god who had stolen the sun could also bring Noah from the ground to the secluded world. Now, there is no medium on the ground that Susanoo can use, so he has no way to send Noah back to the modern world. As for the monk, he was not proficient in this aspect at all. The princess was a god ancestor, so she knew how to enter and exit the hidden world. However, they also lacked the necessary tools for the ceremony, so the princess was at her wit's end. Therefore, Noah could only return to the modern world like the great sage, Heaven's Equal, through this exit. After looking around, Noah finally saw it. In front of the palace, there was a distorted space. It was as clear as water. That's the exit, right? Noah stared at the space in front of him. It seems that Sun Wukong has opened the exit and returned to the modern realm. I hope he won't act recklessly in his injured state. As soon as Noah finished speaking, a dazzling light flashed in the pocket of his coat just as he was about to fly into the space. Seeing this, Noah could not help but be stunned. Then, he remembered something and quickly took out something from the pocket of his coat. It was 3 pieces of jade in the shape of Magatama. The 3 pieces of Magatama that were shining with a dazzling red light trembled slightly. Then, they gradually became distorted in the light. Not long after, the 3 pieces of Magatama turned into 3 figures and fell to the ground. Noah immediately stretched out his hands and hugged 2 of the figures in his arms. The other figure fell directly to the ground. With a bang, it landed hard on the ground. It hurts. A scream immediately sounded. Ugh. The other 2 figures in Noah's arms let out a soft moan. Their eyelids fluttered a few times and then they opened their eyes. With the 2 girls in his arms, Noah slowly descended from the sky and landed on the ground. He was like a frog, lying on the ground in front of the 2 people. He slightly shook the 2 girls in his arms. Are you okay? Hearing this, the 2 young girls covered their heads and said in a daze. What happened to me? I feel so uncomfortable. Of course, the 2 girls only felt a little uncomfortable. The young man who fell heavily on the ground was a little miserable. He held his waist and struggled to get up with a pale face. My waist. The 3 people were the ones who had been turned into Magatama and entered the secluded world with Noah. They were Wanli Gu Yoli, Qingxiu Courtyard Cui Na, and Gan Chi Dong Ma. Because humans had no way of adapting to the secluded world, the princess turned them into Magatama to prevent them from losing their lives. Now that the 3 of them were in this space, the transformation technique was undone. After all, this space was not only separated from the secluded world. In order to allow the witches who served the great sage, Heaven's Equal, to heaven to enter and leave freely, this space was also enchanted to allow humans to adapt to the secluded world. Therefore, the transformation technique of the 3 was undone. Gan Chi Dong Ma, who was holding his waist, grimaced as he instinctively observed his surroundings. Where is this? Wanli-gu Yoli and Qingxiu courtyards Huina also regained their senses and looked around. Seeing that the three of them had returned to their original state, Noah directly spoke. It's a long story. In short, let's leave the secluded world and return to the modern world first. Secluded world? Wanli-gu Yoli and Qingxiu courtyards Huina looked at Noah in surprise. This is the secluded world? That's right. Noah nodded. I will explain it to you slowly on the way. Let's go out first. Wanli-gu Yoli, Qingxiu courtyards Huina, and Gan Qi Dong Ma looked at each other, then nodded. After entering the distorted space, everything around them became extremely dark, leaving only a path that was emitting light, connecting them to the front where they couldn't see the end. Noah, Wanli-gu Yoli, Qingxiu courtyards Huina, and Gan Qi Dong Ma ran forward at a speed beyond what ordinary humans should have. However, Wanli-gu Yoli, whose physical strength was weaker than the average person, couldn't have such leg strength. He was now being carried by Qingxiu courtyards Huina. Under such circumstances, Noah briefly explained the current situation to the three of them. The curse of the great sage, heaven's equal, is broken? Gan Qi Dong Ma was slightly surprised, then he had a headache. This is troublesome. Not only Gan Qi Dong Ma, but even Wanli-gu Yoli and Qingxiu courtyards Huina were surprised. This made Noah a little surprised. Why? Do you all know that the great sage, heaven's equal, is imprisoned? As long as you are a person in the industry, you will know more or less. Gan Qi Dong Ma explained. King also knows about the 4 major families in Japan's curse world, right? Among the 4 major families, the Jiyoshi Mizuka family enshrines Lord Ape in Nikko's West Heaven Palace. It is not an ordinary enshrine, but a deity who was originally the god of disobedience is sealed there. The Jiyoshi Mizuka family has been borrowing the power of this deity for many years. However, Lord Ape in the West Heaven Palace is sealed with a great curse. If you want to borrow the power of the deity, you must have Witch Yuan, who can weaken the seal, to enshrine. Otherwise, there is no way to borrow the power of the deity. Huina continued Gan Qi Dong Ma's words. Huina heard that Witch Yuan, who has this kind of talent, has not appeared again in the past 100 years. Therefore, the Jiyoshi Mizuka family has not received the help of the deity's power for nearly 100 years. As a result, today, the curse that sealed Lord Ape was split open by obedient parting sword, EA, allowing the great sage, heaven's equal, to freedom. During the conversation, a light like a cave entrance appeared in front of them. Seeing the light, Noah and his party quickly quickened their pace and rushed into the light. The next moment, the darkness faded, allowing the sunlight to enter the vision of Noah and his party. However, other than the sunlight, there was also a scene that could only be described as unbearable to look at, imprinted in everyone's eyes. It was a dilapidated ruin. Chapter 14:20. Small pieces of debris and pebbles were rolling on the ground, or falling from the piles of ruins, stirring up waves of soft noises. A cool breeze blew through the ruins, stirring up thick sand and dust, making the air a little turbid. The scene imprinted in the eyes of Noah and the others made their faces freeze. Compared to the forbidden city-like palace in the space where the great sage, heaven's equal, was imprisoned, this was a magnificent temple that was not the slightest bit inferior. However, at this moment, everything in the temple seemed to have been ravaged by a strong earthquake, turning into a tragic ruin. The surrounding trees fell in a radial pattern in all directions. The buildings seemed to have collapsed, turning into piles of rubble. One could faintly see people dressed as clergymen lying on the ground, or directly buried in the rubble, their bodies covered in dust. That scene was simply like the scene of a disaster, making people feel suffocated. Wanli-gu Yoli had already covered her small mouth with her hand, turning her head away as if she could not bear to look directly. This is too much. Huina, the careless wild child, could not help but whisper. It seems that when the great sage left the Western Heaven Palace, he wreaked havoc, and then left. This was indeed something that the monkey would do. He must have thought that even if he retreated, he would retreat in a grand and open manner. After blowing away the entire Western Heaven Palace, he would then leave on the somersault cloud. Anyway, with the different values of those gods and humans, they would certainly not carry out such atrocities with the idea of destroying the prison where they had been imprisoned for many years with resentment. That was why those so-called disobedient gods were so detestable. It was estimated that even Athena, who had a very deep relationship with Noah, would not care about the lives of mere humans. If necessary, she would not mind making a river of blood, right? Because these gods who appeared on the ground were all disobedient gods who had long been swallowed up by the unique arrogance of the disobedient gods, they would only wreak havoc on the ground without mercy. Noah closed his eyes and fully unfolded his sensing ability. After sensing the aura of the scene, he opened his eyes again. The people here still have aura on them. They are not dead yet. Hurry up and arrange for rescue to rescue them from the ruins. Otherwise, they will really lose their lives. Hearing Noah's words, Wanli Gu Yoli breathed a sigh of relief, and then hurriedly said to Ganji Winterhorse, who was beside him. Mr. Ganji, please hurry up and arrange for rescue. It's already done. Ganji Winterhorse took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. I will report the situation to the higher-ups and arrange for rescue. I will also send people to search for the whereabouts of the great sage, Heaven's equal. I hope that we can find him while he is seriously injured. It would be best if there are other places like this. After leaving such ominous words, Ganji Winterhorse took his mobile phone and went to the side to make arrangements. King Hui Na looked at Noah. What should we do? Wanli Gu Yoli also turned his gaze to Noah, his face full of worry and nervousness. Noah couldn't help but smile bitterly. What should we do? What else can we do? Do you have a way to fight against that monkey here? It's impossible, right? Even if it's Hui Na, it's the same. Hui Na said directly. Sure enough, we can only ask the king. Mr. Noah. Wanli Gu Yoli obviously had the same idea, so he mustered up his courage and said to Noah. Can we ask you to help us deal with the great sage? You don't need to ask, I will do it. Noah laughed, then looked at the ruins in front of him and said softly. After all, this is an agreement, and also my responsibility. The agreement refers to the agreement with the History Compilation Committee. The History Compilation Committee provides Noah with an attendant who is responsible for solving secular affairs. During this period, if the god of disobedience appears in Japan, then Noah will deal with it. Now, it is time to implement this agreement. As for the responsibility, it refers to Noah's personal responsibility. After all, although it was unintentional, the person who released the great sage, Heaven's equal, was Noah, wasn't it? Since this is the case, Noah naturally has to bear this responsibility and send the monkey back to the Western Paradise, so that it will not come out again to harm people. Although Noah is still adapting to the current authority, it will take about 3 more days for him to use it. However, the current Noah is no longer an ignorant person. Even if he doesn't use the authority, he still has the ability to face the highest level of the god of disobedience alone. The battle with Susanoo just proved this point. So, don't let me find you, stinky monkey. Unfortunately, Noah doesn't know. The impact of the reappearance of Sun Wukong is not limited to this island country. In the Brittany region of France, in a forest, a young girl who looks to be only 12 or 13 years old, but is wearing a pitch-black dress and exuding a noble temperament, stood by a lake, as if praying, and spoke to the lake. Uncle, a new stele has appeared in the island country at the end of the east. The girl's words seemed to turn into ripples, causing the lake to begin to fluctuate. Not long after, on the lake, the image of a knight wearing white armor emerged from the lake. My beloved daughter, Guinevere, will the stele that has appeared this time be the king that we are searching for? I'm not sure. Using stele as an example, it seems to be a god with other complicated attributes, and is not the most orthodox and pure stele god like Uncle. Guinevere closed her eyes, still in a praying position. However, Guinevere and Uncle have been searching for Master all these years, but we have not set foot on the island country at the end of the east. Now that stele has suddenly appeared in that island country, Guinevere thinks that there must be a reason. That is to say, this is your intuition? The god named Lancelot said in a heavy voice. Since it is your intuition as the Queen of Witches, then the possibility is very high. Unfortunately, it did not trigger spirit vision, just some inspiration. Guinevere opened her eyes and looked at Lancelot in the lake. So, uncle, I plan to set off and go to the island country at the end of the east to investigate. Let's do as you say. Lancelot did not have any objections. However, don't forget, we were defeated by the young god Slayer once, and even the Holy Grail was taken away. This time, we can't be careless. A trace of hatred and fear appeared in Guinevere's eyes, and she nodded heavily. At the same time, in London, England, in a luxurious mansion. Enjoying the title of princess, the girl who was known as the most outstanding lady in Europe was walking in the courtyard, bathing in the sun while talking to herself comfortably. It's so good to be able to walk freely. Because of her special talent, the girl's body had always been very weak. In recent years, she could only lie in bed and could no longer get up. She could only rely on the method of creating doppelgangers to move around in the sun. However, a month ago, the girl got rid of that life and her body recovered. This is all thanks to the king. The girl pursed her lips and smiled elegantly. At the same time, she thought of the method that the king helped her recover. Her pretty face flushed slightly, and her small hand pressed on her lips, looking like a young girl in love. He is so tough. I really want to complain to him. Just as she finished speaking, the young lady seemed to have suddenly sensed something. She stopped in her tracks and smiled sweetly. Hiding in the dark and peeping on ladies? That's a pretty good hobby, isn't it? This sentence was immediately rebutted by a displeased voice. Undoubtedly, the guy who is best at peeping. What are you talking about? As the voice sounded, a bolt of lightning suddenly appeared in the courtyard. The lightning gradually turned into a bolt of lightning, and then into a figure that entered the girl's eyes. The girl who was familiar with the enemy in front of her knew what kind of power this was. It was the power called lightning spark. The person who came was Yerek. Chapter 14:21. Seeing Yerek suddenly appear in front of her, Alice sighed faintly as if she was worried about a friend. When will the person known as the prince get rid of the habit of breaking into other people's homes? This was not the first time Yerek had broken into Alice's home without permission. With the seraphic authority, there was almost no place that the Black Prince could not go without being discovered by anyone. That was why the Black Prince was secretly known as the most powerful monster thief in history. Ever since Yerek became enemies with her, he had broken into Alice's home without permission more than once. Fortunately, Alice had an ability called mental telepathy. This ability allowed her to eliminate distracting thoughts and focus her mind. She could slightly detect other people's aura, feelings, and even what they were thinking. She could then interfere with the source of the spirit, which was the so-called spiritual body and soul, and then manipulate them with dexterity. This was a special ability that only a very small number of witches could use. Alice might not be able to read the mind of the God Slayer with this ability, but she could still sense the aura of the God Slayer by releasing her mental power. Therefore, even if Yerek broke into Alice's home, she could still clearly sense his arrival. That was why Yerek called her the best at peeping. Through the use of mental telepathy, Alice could clearly sense everything that was happening in other places, just like Noah's telepathy. The difference was that Noah could only sense hostility, malice, murderous intent, aura, or some other abnormalities. Alice, on the other hand, could completely detect everything that was happening in the place she sensed. It was as if she had seen and heard it in person. There would be no deviation. This way, Alice could more or less fight against Yerek. After all, the Black Prince Yerek was a political enemy of the Wise Men's Parliament. If she fought against the God Slayer with force, she would lose in the end, no matter what the process was. As the God Slayer, Yerek could easily destroy the Wise Men's Parliament if he wanted to. Therefore, to fight against Yerek, she needed to use politics, negotiation, strategy, negotiation, economy, and so on. She could not just use force. Otherwise, they would definitely suffer a crushing defeat. It was because of this that Alice was able to defeat the Godslayer many times with the help of Paul Brantley, the commander of the Black Cross, Erica's uncle, who had the highest title of paladin among humans and was comparable to god beasts and god ancestors. As for him breaking into her house without permission every time, Alice just let him be. In any case, there was no way he could fight against Yurek by force alone. In that case, it would be better to be more magnanimous and allow the other party to enter and leave freely. This way, Alice would be able to show her calmness in the political confrontation and gain a certain advantage. Now, Alice was targeting Yurek for trespassing on private property and verbally attacking him. In this regard, Yurek only gave a sarcastic remark. Since that's the case, let's set up some defenses. If the princess doesn't have any guards around her, wouldn't that be very degrading? As he said this, Yurek's gaze swept over Alice's body and narrowed his eyes. Besides, you're actually using your real body today, and you look very healthy. Have you finally found a way to get rid of your illness? You're still as outspoken as before, Alice said with an elegant smile. I just got a little help from a wise king. A wise king? Yurek's eyes flickered slightly as he stared at Alice closely. Among today's god slayers, almost every one of them is a battle maniac who only causes trouble. As far as I know, there is only one person who can be called wise. Oh. Alice was a little surprised. How rare, Alexander. You actually admit that there is a wise person among the god slayers other than yourself? I'm just stating facts. Compared to the others, that guy's brain is indeed better. Yurek looked directly at Alice. You, on the other hand, may be called a princess, but only I know how bad your personality is. In your opinion, the other god slayers are probably just walking catastrophes. You actually think that one of them is wise? It's going to rain in England tomorrow. Can I take it that you're just jealous? Alice was not provoked by Yurek's provocation. She pursed her lips and smiled. At least, in my opinion, that lord is indeed much wiser than you god slayers. Don't lump me in with the rest of them, Yurek finally blurted out. I'm not brainless like those guys who only think about solving things with their fists all day long. But if you can solve things with your fists, surely you wouldn't mind doing so? Alice poked at Yurek's sore spot. Then what's the difference between you and the other god slayers? Then what about the king you think is wise? Yurek said sarcastically. If I remember correctly, when he first came out, he fought with the Italian idiot one-on-one and caused a loss of 15 billion euros. Later, in order to defeat the homeless old man and the powerful woman from China, he caused great damage. Can that be called wise? You're looking at things from the wrong point of view, Alexander, Alice immediately retorted. That lord has been a god slayer for almost half a year, but he has only caused this level of damage in half a year. In the past month, he hasn't caused any commotion. Compared to you people who fight to the death with the gods every few days, how wise is he? Well. Yurek was suddenly speechless and said angrily. I didn't expect that you, who have never sided with any of the god slayers, would speak for him like this. Don't tell me you like him. WH. What? Alice's elegant demeanor instantly disappeared without a trace. Her pretty face turned red as she stood up in anger. It's not gentlemanly to casually fabricate a relationship between a lady and the opposite sex. Alexander, don't you have any manners? I just said it casually. I didn't expect you to have such a big reaction. Yurek's mouth twitched, and a rare expression of interest appeared on his face. Don't tell me that the person who is called a princess in Europe has finally fallen in love with someone? When did you become such a gossipy person? Why didn't I know that you have such a cute curiosity? Alice blushed and stared at Yurek. You didn't come to me just to talk about this, did you? What's the matter? Humph. Yurek snorted, but still got to the point. I received news that the god ancestor has left Brita, and his whereabouts are unknown. God ancestor? Lord Guinevere? Alice calmed down and asked in surprise. Why? Who knows? Yurek said directly. It's precisely because I want to know her whereabouts that I came to find you. In terms of collecting information, the Sage Parliament, which Alice belonged to, was undoubtedly more suitable than Yerek's royal factory. Princess Alice, who had the best spiritual vision and spiritual perception in Europe, was also more suitable than Yerek to do this kind of thing. That god ancestor is our common enemy, Yerek said meaningfully. I think, in this regard, you won't mind working with me, right? That is to say, you provide information about the enemy's departure, and I provide information about the enemy's location? Alice sighed. You're still the same as before. You're better than anyone else. Having said that, Alice started to laugh happily. Well, I haven't used my real body to travel for a long time. This time, I'll use my real body to work. Hearing that, Yerek knew what to do. It was a done deal. In addition to Guinevere, Lancelot, Yerek, Alice, and the others, there was one more person who also took action. Soon, these people would meet Noah, who was in the center of the chaos, and cause a big commotion. Chapter 14:22. While the rest of the people from all sides were mobilized because of the appearance of the great sage, Noah, Huina, and Yuli stayed in a hotel under the arrangement of Ganzhan Dongma. More than 10 hours had passed since the great sage, Heaven's Equal, had escaped. It was now nighttime. After Ganzhan Dongma reported that the great sage had escaped, only about 30 minutes later, people from the History Compilation Committee came to the Western Heaven Palace, sealed off the scene, and began their work. Because the History Compilation Committee was an official organization, even the police force was mobilized. Therefore, a large number of police cars were now surrounding the Western Heaven Palace. They had cordoned off the entire area around the Western Heaven Palace, making it look like a murder scene. There were also a large number of police officers in uniform stationed there. The security was very tight. Of course, no matter how tight the security was, it was only for ordinary people. For those magicians and conjurers who had mastered mysterious powers, breaking through such a scene was just a piece of cake. For this reason, almost half of these police officers were conjurers in disguise. In addition, there were a large number of secret personnel hiding around to keep watch. A large number of staff members also poured into the Western Heaven Palace to treat the people who had been killed. Should it be said that it was a blessing in disguise? Sun Wukong blew the entire Western Heaven Palace away. It seemed that it was really just for show, and he did not care about the survival of human beings. Because of this, the great sage, Heaven's Equal, would naturally not go after the humans. After blowing away the people in the Western Heaven Palace along with the buildings, he retreated on his own. Since the great sage only targeted the buildings and did not target the people in the Western Heaven Palace, although some of the people who had been killed were seriously injured, none of them really died and were rescued in time. In other words, the farce of the great sage was only targeted at a group of buildings. Apart from causing a lot of damage, there were no deaths or injuries. This was undoubtedly good news. Therefore, the rescue operation almost did not encounter many difficulties. It only took about 4 or 5 hours for all the people who had been killed to be rescued. Then, the History Compilation Committee began to mobilize people to investigate the whereabouts of the great sage. However, it was not known whether it was a blessing or a misfortune. Until now, there was still no trace of the great sage, Heaven's Equal. This also meant that other than the Western Heaven Palace, there were no other places that were affected. That was why he didn't know if this news was a blessing or a misfortune. In short, the official History Compilation Committee took on the task of finding the missing person. Noah only needed to wait for the official History Compilation Committee to find the whereabouts of the great sage, Heaven's Equal, before taking down the monkey. Thus, Noah brought the 2 witches and stayed in a hotel arranged by Winterhorse Ganjin. In the hotel, Noah was thinking about how to deal with Sun Wukong while telling Yuri and Huina the details of the great sage equaling Heaven's escape. After listening to the whole process in detail, the 2 witches were stunned. So, the person who released the great saint is the king? Huey's face was full of shock and admiration. Furthermore, it was because he accidentally released the great sage because of a fight with Grandpa. The king is truly amazing. Mr. Noah. Yoli was a little angry. How can you be so impulsive? What do you mean by impulsive? Do you want me to silently bear the provocation of those two useless gods and Buddhas? Noah retorted. I'm sorry, I can't do it. Those two guys are too annoying. I didn't finish them off at the end and send them to the real Western paradise. I'm already giving them a lot of face. Well, Grandpa is really annoying sometimes. Although Huina has no memory of being angered, Mr. Ganjin and others often have headaches because of Grandpa's willfulness. Huina said generously. On the contrary, the king can actually split the curse that imprisoned the great sage with a sword. Huina is impressed. What's wrong? Noah asked curiously. Is that curse difficult to break? It's not difficult to break, but super difficult to break, Huina explained. Huina heard that if you want to break the curse that imprisoned the great sage, heaven's equal, you must meet 3 conditions. The first condition is to make the dragon snake's divinity appear, Huina said. Because the great sage is the god of steel, the sword god born to conquer the dragon snake. Therefore, the dragon snake's blood and divine power can stimulate his power and remind him of his tyrannical nature. The second condition is to have a treasured sword with a weakened seal, Huina said with assurance. It is said that if you want to break the curse of Lord Ape and borrow the power of Lord Ape, you have to let Witch Yuan, who can weaken the seal, worship him. Witch Yuan's power alone is not enough. She needs to cooperate with the treasured sword that also has the power to weaken the seal. The treasured sword is kept by the Jiufa Zhong family. And the third condition is to let Witch Yuan, who has the ability of a calamity, hold the treasured sword and use her spiritual power to cut the seal, Huina said to Noah. That's the ability to erase or restore the power of curses, spells, magic, and other mysterious things that shouldn't exist in this world. However, it has very little effect on the power of the god and the god slayer. Witch Yuan, who can worship the god lord, must have this ability to use the treasured blade, weaken the seal, and borrow the power of the god lord. It was precisely because of such a rare ability that the Jiufa Zhong family had not been able to find Witch Yuan with this ability for nearly 100 years to worship the great sage, heaven's equal. It was also because the conditions for unlocking the seal were so complicated that only when the dragon snake appeared could the great sage, heaven's equal, temporarily escape and come out to slay the dragon snake. However, according to Grandpa, even if the seal is unlocked, the curse will still recover after a while and seal the great sage, heaven's equal, back to the West Heaven Palace. Huina tried hard to recall the information she heard from Susanoo. Such a curse that can even imprison the god of disobedience and manipulate him to a certain extent. It is said that the elders of Yushur exhausted their efforts and spent nearly a lifetime to complete it. Anyone who wants to lift this curse must follow the lifting method. Huina looked at Noah with admiration. As a result, the king actually violently lifted the entire curse at once. It's amazing. Hearing this, Noah couldn't help but laugh dryly. Noah didn't know that the curse that imprisoned the great sage, heaven's equal, was so complicated and powerful. Gathering the wisdom of the elders of secluded world, it took the equivalent of a lifetime to complete the great curse. No wonder it could imprison the god of disobedience and control him to a certain extent. Unfortunately, no matter how powerful the curse was, in the end, it was just a barrier and seal that formed a cage. In the face of the power that could cut the world and open the world, there was no reason why any barrier and seal could not be broken. It was precisely because the curse that imprisoned the great sage, heaven's equal, was a barrier that the noble phantasm named Good Parting Sword, E.A., could cut it off. After all, Good Parting Sword, E.A., was originally a noble phantasm. It's just that I didn't expect that even Tian Songyun was destroyed. Yoli looked at Huina, hesitated, and said softly. Huina, this shouldn't affect you, right? It's okay. Huina waved her hand casually. Although without the divine blade, I will definitely lose a part of my strength, but I can still use the invite God to descend technique and borrow Grandpa's power. Even if I can't compete with God, I won't lose to anyone else. Indeed. Even without Tian Songyun, Hui Na's invite God to descend technique could still obtain the same power as the god ancestor and mythological beast. This was the real violation of the rules of the head of the witch Yuan. Of course, just as she said. No matter how much she violated the rules, she couldn't be compared to God and the God Slayer. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Noah, Yoli, and Hui Na cast their gazes over at the same time. They saw Winterhorse Gontai open the door and walked in from outside the door. As soon as he came in, Winterhorse Gontai said such a sentence. King, I'm afraid you don't have to deal with the great sage, heaven's equal. Such a sentence made Noah completely stunned. Chapter 14:23. In the dark night, the soft moonlight slanted downwards, illuminating the entire bustling city. A cold wind with a slight chill blew past, causing the clear whistling sound of the wind to reverberate in the surroundings. It did not subside for a long time. On top of a tall building in such a city, a young man suddenly flew over like a bird. In the blink of an eye, he landed on the roof of the tall building. His body bent slightly, and his knees bent slightly. The force of his fall was completely neutralized, and he straightened his back. It was a young man of about 14 or 15 years old, wearing a black shirt and jeans of the same color. With light steps, the young man nimbly leaped onto the railing of the building. As if he was weightless, he stood upright on the railing, looking down and muttering. The place where the great sage appeared is probably around here, right? Taking a closer look, in the direction where the young man was looking, there was a messy area that had turned into ruins. The area around the ruins was completely cordoned off by a police cordon. Police officers and police cars were also surrounding the area, guarding the area like it was heavily guarded. That was naturally the Western Heaven Palace, which originally worshipped the great sage, heaven's equal as the ape god. The young man looked in the direction of the Western Heaven Palace and sighed as if he found it troublesome. Although it's very easy to break in, it doesn't make any sense. Anyway, the great sage is definitely not there. Master only asked me to find the great sage. It's useless to come here. Although he said that, the young man's eyes were quite sharp as they swept across the ruins of the Western Heaven Palace. The traces of the collapse of the rubble are still very clear. Although some of it has been cleaned up, it should be a measure taken for the rescue. Looking at it this way, the rubble was created about a dozen hours ago, which is not much different from the information we received. Then, the young man seemed to have felt something. He turned his head and looked in one direction. There is a huge amount of curse power residue here. I'm afraid that the great sage should have left in this direction. It had to be said that the young man's observation skills were really outstanding. However, for magicians and conjurers who had mastered the mysteries, this level of tracking could be completed in an instant with a small magic trick or curse. They did not need to spend much effort to carefully observe the surrounding movements. Unfortunately, the young man had to go through this kind of observation to come to the same conclusion. Because, although the young man was very famous in the magic world, he was a complete layman when it came to spells. If the youth were to fight, in this world, the number of people who could claim to be able to defeat him in a one-on-one battle would not exceed 10. Of course, that was under the condition that the God Slayer and the God of Disobedience were not taken into account. However, if the young man were to do the delicate work of tracking, it would only make things more efficient. The youth himself was very clear about this. However, there was nothing the youth could do. After all, it's master's orders, the young man grumbled. Even though he knew that it would waste a lot of time for me to do it, master still completely ignored it. It would be better to say that when the young man spoke frankly about this matter, not only did the master he spoke of not pay any attention to him, he even berated him. The relationship between master and disciple is like that of a mother and son. As your guide on the path of martial arts, I am about to step into someone else's territory. As my disciple, not only did you not have any thoughts of exploring the path for your master, you even shirked away like this. How can you achieve great things in the future? Saying this, the young man's master directly sent him flying. No matter how many people there were, as long as they knew the details, they would definitely cry for the young man's grievances and feel resentful for the master's rudeness. However, to the young man, this kind of thing had long become a common occurrence. His master's rudeness was natural. This was because, no matter how rudeness he was, everyone in this world could only silently endure it. No one could resist. No one could object to his master's rudeness. This was because, even if the whole world condemned this rudeness, the young man's master could use his own strength to suppress everyone's voices. As long as his master was willing, he could completely destroy the whole world of humans by himself. As long as his master was willing, he could destroy 1 or 2 territories on the world map by himself. With such a powerful person, no matter how rudeness he was, it was imaginable. Under such circumstances, just a little bit of violence and a little bit of extreme way of teaching his disciple was already considered a blessing to the whole world. The young man grew up in such an environment. It was precisely because of this that the young man could grow into a person that the magicians and cursemancers of the world could not underestimate at this age. Forget it, for the time being, I've arranged for people to come over and search. The young man scratched his head. I've also talked to the gang that secretly controls this country in advance. I think it's called the Official History Compilation Committee. Presumably, they won't disobey my master's orders, right? Just as these words were spoken, a voice suddenly rang out. That's not necessarily true. The sudden voice made the young man's entire body tense up in an instant, and a surge of curse power surged out of his body. At this time, the young man only had one thought in his mind. How could he not notice the presence of someone who was so close to him? The person who came was definitely not simple. With this thought in mind, the young man jumped up and jumped over the fence like a bird. He flipped in the air and landed on the rooftop of the building, facing the source of the voice. Then, the young man raised his head and looked in front of him. There, without him knowing when 3 people appeared there. One was a young girl wearing a witch costume with a trace of determination and worry on her face. She looked like a weak princess who worried about the country and the people. Another was a young girl wearing a uniform with a graceful figure. Her beautiful black waist-length hair swayed in the wind, and her body exuded the elegant and natural temperament of Yamato Nadeshiko. The last one was a young man with black hair and black eyes, wearing an ordinary black shirt and black pants, and a pitch-black coat. The young man did not notice the 3 people in front of him until the moment the voice sounded. When the voice sounded, the young man immediately noticed the presence of the 2 young girls. However, the young man's presence was so close to the young man that the young man did not notice at all. After observing the posture of the 2 young girls, the young man made a judgment. The witch who was like a weak princess had no achievements in martial arts. It was impossible for her to hide from his senses and suddenly appear here. The young girl who was like Yamato Nadeshiko was very unusual. She was not weaker than him, but it was impossible for her to not be noticed by the young man when she was so close to him. Then, there was only one explanation left. The 2 young girls were brought here by the unfathomable young man. He did not know the origin of the other party, but it was definitely not simple. For the time being, he should test the situation first. The young man who made these judgments in a short moment had a face that was neither respectful nor arrogant. He was quite casual and neither servile nor overbearing. He cupped his fist and saluted. I don't know how to address you. The 2 young girls did not speak, but glanced at the young man vaguely. Obviously, the young man was the center of the 3. The young man was naturally Noah. It was Noah who took Yoli and Huina, tore open the teleportation magic scroll and instantly teleported to this building. You are Lu Yinghua, right? Noah looked at the young man with interest. The personal disciple of sect leader Luo Hao, the young master of the Lu family in Hong Kong, China, who is famous for his excellent lightness skill and great palm strength. I didn't expect you to be so young. Yes. The young man in front of him was the personal disciple of Luo Hao, the leader of the martial arts world of China, who commanded the world with the title of Wuxia King. In other words, this 14 or 15-year-old young man was a genius who was apprenticed to a god slayer. Moreover, he was the disciple of Luo Hao, who was famous for his excellent martial arts skills and was well known throughout the world. He was a senior among the god slayers, and only Warban could match him. The reason why Kanekiri said, "I'm afraid you don't have to deal with it," was because of the arrival of this personal disciple of the god slayer. I heard that sect leader Luo Hao plans to come to Japan personally to fight the great sage, Heaven's Equal. Noah looked at the young man named Lu Yinghua. This shouldn't be just a casual remark, right? Chapter 1424. Just 10 minutes ago, Ganshi Dongma brought the news of Luo Hao's plan to come to Japan and fight with the great sage to Noah. He also said that sect leader Luo Hao had ordered the people of the History Compilation Committee not to interfere. Not only that, Luo Hao had also sent his personal disciple here to search for the whereabouts of the great sage. After receiving this news, the upper echelons of the History Compilation Committee asked Ganshi Dongma to bring this news to Noah and let Noah make a decision. Lu Yinghua was right. The History Compilation Committee did not dare to disobey the orders of sect leader Luo Hao. Therefore, Lu Yinghua thought that the people of the History Compilation Committee should obediently listen to Luo Hao's orders and not interfere in this matter. However, there was an accident here. That was, there was another king in this island. It was because of the order of this king that the History Compilation Committee began to search for the whereabouts of the great sage. Now, Luo Hao's order undoubtedly had a fierce conflict with Noah's order. As a result, the History Compilation Committee, which no one dared to offend, did not obediently stop work as Lu Yinghua expected. Instead, they asked Ganshi Dongma to report this matter to Noah and let Noah make a decision. After learning this matter, Noah was surprised. Although Noah had only met Luo Hao once, he still understood the actions of the Wuxia king. Although this Wuxia king could command the world, she followed the style of China women. She lived in Mount Lu and did not like to show her face in public. If an ordinary person saw her face and heard her voice, Luo Hao would cruelly cut off the other party's tongue and destroy the other party's ears. She was a real tyrant. Why would such a person suddenly travel to Japan for the great sage, Heaven's Equal, and even order the History Compilation Committee not to interfere? With this question in mind, Noah asked Ganshi Dongma. Unfortunately, Ganshi Dongma also did not know. Therefore, Noah had the idea of finding Lu Yinghua, who had the ability to be accepted as a disciple by Luo Hao. Then, just as Noah was about to search for Lu Yinghua's whereabouts, Ganshi Dongma received the news. Lu Yinghua arrived at the Western Heaven Palace. After all, the official History Compilation Committee had already placed spies around the Western Heaven Palace. Lu Yinghua ran over without any concealment. Naturally, he was discovered immediately. Therefore, Noah tore open a teleportation magic scroll on the spot, took Yoli and Hui Na, and instantly teleported to the building where Lu Yinghua was. Sect Master Luo Hao doesn't like to show himself in public, right? Noah pursed his lips. Why would you suddenly come here to fight the great sage, Heaven's Equal? As a disciple, I don't dare to guess Master's intentions. Lu Yinghua said with a fake smile. However, according to Master, the god of disobedience is undoubtedly a great hero of China, but he was raised by the Neon people. It is really an unforgivable crime. Knowing the existence of such a guy and leaving him alone would damage his reputation. Therefore, since a long time ago, Master has been waiting for the time to come to condemn the great sage, Heaven's Equal. Huh? Yoli was stunned and said with some uncertainty. Just because of this reason? Just because of this reason. Lu Yinghua shrugged, but there was no warmth in his eyes when he looked at Yoli. What? Does this sister have a problem with it? Yoli's heart tightened when she was stared at by Lu Yinghua's cold eyes. At this time, Yoli remembered the advice Ganshi Dongma gave before leaving. If Miss Yoli and Miss Hui Na also plan to see Lu Yinghua, then it's best to be careful. That Wuxia is said to have been disciplined very strictly by sect leader Luo Hao since he was a child. He was even disciplined to the point of violence at the slightest provocation. As a result, he developed misogyny and is particularly hostile to beautiful and capable women. It's best not to have a conflict with him, otherwise, he will never show mercy. In view of this, Yoli seemed to have succeeded in arousing Lu Yinghua's disgust. After all, Yoli's appearance was quite outstanding, wasn't it? On the contrary, after listening to Lu Yinghua's explanation, Hui Na couldn't help but smile bitterly with a dumbfounded expression. It's amazing, because it's too amazing, Hui Na doesn't know what to say. Obviously, Luo Hao's willful and unscrupulous behavior had reached the point where even Yoli, who had been cultivating in the mountains since he was a child, was speechless. Only Noah sighed as if he had a headache. I see, it's indeed what the sect leader would say. In the past, Luo Hao went directly to Italy to find trouble with Noah because of a small provocation from Athena. At that time, Noah had fully understood how serious Luo Hao's willful and unscrupulous behavior was. However, this Wuxia king of China was extremely narcissistic and thought that everyone in the world was inferior to him. Even if they were both godslayers, he treated them as juniors and did not care about them at all. He only saw Warban as his enemy. As a result, after being defeated by Noah in Italy, the Wuxia king simply admitted defeat, which indeed reflected the generosity and straightforwardness of Chinese Wuxia, which changed Noah's impression of him a lot. Now it seemed that even if he had no shortcomings as a Wuxia king, as a king, the sect leader was a problematic child who gave people a headache. He was more troublesome than the 16 Knights of Reverse Time, the Distant Flying Bird, and Haruhito Hikari. Might as well let Luo Hao deal with the great sage, heaven's equal. That's not a bad choice. Noah's soliloquy made Lu Yinghua's heart move, and he asked Noah whether intentionally or unintentionally. Your Excellency seems to be quite familiar with my master, may I ask? Forget about asking, I'm not as ostentatious as your master, Noah said to Lu Yinghua in a bad mood. Just tell your master directly that if she wants the head of the great sage, heaven's equal, I can give it to her, but she better not cause any more trouble. Otherwise, this time, it won't be a simple fight. After saying this, Noah shook out a scroll, and a dazzling light covered the three of them, and they disappeared. Only Lu Yinghua was left, and he stared blankly at the place where Noah, Yuri, and Keita disappeared, and did not recover for a long time. In fact, Lu Yinghua was also a proud person. How could Lu Yinghua not be proud to be accepted as a direct disciple by the Wuxia king of China and have the strength to stand at the top of the human race before the age of 15? If someone else had spoken to Lu Yinghua like this, he would definitely not have let it go. However, at this time, Lu Yinghua did not even have the slightest bit of anger, and he began to ponder alone. This time, it's not going to be a simple fight? This sentence revealed a lot of information. This was because only a godslayer could fight with a godslayer. Among the current godslayers, Warban was an old man, Madame Aisha was a woman, and Lu Yinghua knew the physical characteristics of Yarek, Smith, and Tony. After excluding the above 5 people, there was only one godslayer left, right? Moreover, that person had indeed fought with Luo Hao, and had even defeated his master, who was almost invincible in Lu Yinghua's eyes. Thinking of this, Lu Yinghua couldn't help but recall the first sentence that Luo Hao had said to him a few months ago when he suddenly left Lushan Mountain and went to Italy. After that, he suddenly returned without any warning. I didn't expect that I, Luo Zuelian, would have a taste of defeat. Noah Dole is indeed a strong enemy. Noah Dole? Lu Yinghua's expression changed slightly. Could he be the godslayer who defeated Master? This was the only way to connect all the clues. This is troublesome. Lu Yinghua's brows furrowed deeply. I didn't expect that godslayer to be in this country. It seems that I'll have to take a few heavy blows from Master and ask her to come out in advance. At this time, Lu Yinghua still did not know. This decision caused Luo Hao to completely step onto a path of no return, and the trajectory of her entire life had been changed. On the other side, Yoli, who had teleported back to the hotel, spoke to Noah with some concern. Mr. Noah, are you really going to give the great sage, heavens equal to sect leader Luo Hao? If someone is in charge of solving the problem, why not? Noah sighed. Although I have an ominous premonition, that's right. Chapter 1425. The next day. As soon as he got up, Noah received a call from Erica. The god of disobedience appeared on your side? When Noah picked up the phone, Erica's first sentence was this. What's wrong? Noah sighed. Even Italy has received the information? After all, it's information about the god of disobedience, which has always been the most important information for magic societies. If it's a relatively weak divine spark, it's fine, but the god that appeared this time seems to be unusual, right? Erica said meaningfully. And since even I have received the news, the other people who need to pay attention to must have received the same news, such as the Black Prince and the god ancestor who have been looking for you recently. That's true. Noah scratched his cheek. When they come to this island, the news that I'm here should be immediately exposed, right? The god of disobedience that appeared this time was a member of Steel. Since it was Steel, Guinevere, who had been looking for the strongest Steel, would certainly not let go of this opportunity. Even if it crossed the ocean, it would still come to this island country. And where Guinevere would appear, the Black Prince, as its enemy, would also appear. However, both of them regarded Noah as their enemy to some extent, and both intended to seize the magic sacred weapon called Holy Grail from Noah's hands. If they encountered Guinevere and Yerek, there would be all kinds of conflicts. In addition, with the upcoming arrival of Luohao, a group of powerful people were all gathered in this small island country. It would be strange if nothing happened. Not to mention that Guinevere was protected by Lancelot, and the great sage was currently missing. The situation was becoming more and more chaotic. I knew it. The person who is known as the strongest god slayer would not be too peaceful around him. Otherwise, he would not have defeated the King of Swords of Italy as soon as he made his debut, and at the same time defeated 3 of his kind, including the King of Swords, Erica murmured. I'm really curious, where have you been hiding in the past month to be able to remain calm? You didn't call just to make sarcastic remarks, did you? Noah said with some dissatisfaction. If that's the case, I'm hanging up. You really don't know what's good for you. Erica was also displeased. Even if it's just sarcasm, there are plenty of people in Italy who want to talk to me, Erica Brantley, on the phone. You're not satisfied with my preference. You're still as narcissistic as ever. Fortunately, someone even more narcissistic is coming here soon. Otherwise, I would feel embarrassed for you. Noah rolled his eyes. Don't tell me you're calling just to make sarcastic remarks. I just want to confirm the situation on your side, Erica said. If Steel really appears on your side, the god ancestor is likely to be attracted to you. Once the god ancestor goes over, the Black Prince will definitely follow. I'm afraid you won't be able to hide your whereabouts. Since that's the case, Lily and I don't need to care about the surveillance around us anymore. We can go to your side openly. The reason why Erica and Liliana didn't come to Noah's side was that they didn't want to expose Noah's whereabouts to Yerek because of the surveillance of the royal factory. Now, since Noah's whereabouts could be exposed at any time, there was no need to continue hiding it. Is that okay? Noah asked. If you come to my place, it's very likely that you'll have to go against Yerek. In that case, the positions of the copper Black Cross, the bronze Black Cross, and the royal factory should become complicated, right? It's not a good thing to make an enemy of a god slayer. Don't worry. The magic associations in Italy are nominally led by Salvatore. With the Black Prince's personality, he won't make enemies for no reason, Erica said with a smile. Besides, ever since she heard about you, Lily has been clamoring to go to your place. I think it's almost time for her to make trouble. It's time for her to return to your side. Otherwise, she'll really go berserk. Noah was speechless for a moment. However, what Erica said was not necessarily wrong. With Liliana's straightforward and upright personality, it was absolutely impossible for her to stand watching the king she served fight alone in a foreign country while she hid at home and waited for news, right? That knight should have been eager to rush to Noah's side and fight the enemy for Noah. If it weren't for the fact that the person suppressing Liliana was Erica, who had been controlling Liliana since she was a child, Liliana would have rushed to Nippon at all costs. Thinking of the knight who used to take care of his daily life, Noah didn't know whether to laugh or cry. At the same time, he couldn't help but miss the night. In that case, come here quickly. Yes, my lord. Erica put away her teasing smile and said in a respectful tone. My king. Not long after the call with Erica ended, Yoli came to Noah's room with breakfast. The breakfast was not made by Yoli, but by the staff in the hotel. This hotel was not far from the Western Heaven Palace. Therefore, the History Compilation Committee had sent a group of the best chefs here to prepare the best meals for the Devil King, so as not to offend Noah. However, due to Noah's identity, the people of the History Compilation Committee were in excessive awe of Noah, so they could only ask Yoli to deliver the food on their behalf. In view of this, Noah simply asked Yoli to come over and eat with him, so as to avoid running up and down. As for Hui Na, as Noah's attendant, the girl joined in casually and ate with Noah and Yoli. During the meal, Noah mentioned Erica and Liliana. The king's own attendant is going to come here? Hui Na raised her head from the bowl in her hand in surprise and looked at Noah. In other words, the king doesn't need me anymore? Your words are full of ambiguity. Noah smiled embarrassedly. That's true, but Hui Na, in addition to your work as an attendant, you should also have a double duty of surveillance, right? Surveillance? It was Yoli's turn to look at Hui Na in surprise. Hui Na is monitoring Mr. Noah. Was it really discovered? Hui Na smiled embarrassedly. The people of the committee did tell Hui Na that if they find that the king is planning to do something terrible, she must report it to them. This should be considered surveillance, right? Is that so? Yoli looked at Noah evasively. Did Mr. Noah know that he would be monitored like this from the beginning? After all, it's not the first time I've been wandering in a foreign country as a god slayer. It's not reasonable for the existence known as the Devil King to not be monitored at all times, right? Noah said rather open-mindedly. Erica and Liliana, who I just mentioned, became my attendants at the beginning with this purpose. At the beginning? Hui Na asked curiously. What happened after that? After that? Noah recalled the days of traveling with Erica and Liliana in the past few months and couldn't help but smile. After that, we regarded each other as indispensable partners. It was precisely because of this that Erica sincerely called Noah her king, and Liliana unknowingly began to consider herself as Noah's knight. Everything was so natural. Under the circumstances of letting nature take its course, Erica and Liliana no longer used surveillance as their purpose. Instead, they sincerely enjoyed traveling with Noah. Now, the two Italian prodigies had long been recognized as the trusted aides of the seventh king. Even the copper Black Cross and bronze Black Cross no longer asked about Erica and Liliana. The king's companions and attendants? Hui Na tilted her head and smiled sweetly. I wonder if they're powerful. At this moment, the expression on Hui Na's face was that of a warrior who was overjoyed and delighted as if she had met a competitor. Unfortunately, Noah didn't see this expression, nor did he expect that his attendants would start a fight over this. Just like that, the three of them chatted while having their meal in harmony. At this moment, the figure of the winter horse appeared outside the door. As soon as he appeared, the winter horse said directly, "We've found the great sage, heaven's equal, and the situation isn't good." Chapter 14:26. On the edge of the bustling city, there was a mountain. Although it wasn't a towering mountain, it was still a rather majestic deep mountain. It was covered by dense forests and bright sunlight, looking full of vitality. However, at this time, such a deep mountain was fluctuating with a power that was difficult to see with the naked eye. In the tremor of the air, a strong spell surged from the deep mountain and reverberated in all directions, making people's vision seem to be distorted. They only felt that the whole deep mountain was trembling. In front of such a deep mountain, at a certain moment, a darkness suddenly emerged like fog and gathered into the shape of a door. 3 figures walked out of it and came to the front of the deep mountain. Hui Na frowned slightly and seemed to be a little uncomfortable. What a huge spell, even Hui Na feels a little uncomfortable. Since Hui Na, who could use the technique of invite God to descend, with the help of the gods, felt uncomfortable, Yuli, who was only at the level of an ordinary conjurer, naturally found it even more difficult to endure the invasion of the huge spell. However, just like Noah's previous experiment with the strengthening effect of the dragon sun's sovereignty, although the spell was huge, it was not targeted. Just slightly increasing the spell in the body, Yuli and Hui Na's complexion were restored to normal. Then, Yuli, who had been staring in the direction of the deep mountain, suddenly trembled and flashed with a dim light. The Monkey King that was born from the stone can naturally gain vitality from the stone. The so-called steel hero is also the natural enemy of goddess Gaia, so he can extract essence from the earth. This will be the precursor to the recovery of China's ape god, and he will once again reign. Looking at Yuli suddenly muttering absent-mindedly, Noah and Hui Na both became spirited. This is spirit vision, ? Hui Na said with some surprise. Yuli triggered spirit vision, ? Under Hui Na's surprised voice, the brilliant light in Yuli's eyes began to dissipate. I know. Yuli could not help but raise his voice a little. The great sage is burying himself in the mountain and becoming one with the rocks. He obtains vitality from the rocks and the earth to heal his injuries. It was just like what Yuli had seen with his spirit vision. As the Monkey King that was born from the stone, the great sage, heaven's equals life was obtained from the stone. Naturally, he could obtain life force from the stone as well. Furthermore, the god of steel was the natural enemy of the Gaia goddess, so he could more or less extract some of the earth's essence and convert it into life force. With the help of these two factors, the great sage, heaven's equals injuries were recovering at an extremely fast rate. However, this kind of behavior was ultimately just a form of exploitation. Following the great sage, heaven's equals extraction, the originally lush forest in the depths of the mountain started to wither bit by bit. The ground also started to crack as it lost its own life. At this rate, in less than a day, the entire mountain would be turned into a wasteland, right? Of course, the prerequisite was that the great sage, heaven's equal, had not recovered from his injuries and continued to drain the mountain of his life force. And if even the mountain of life force was unable to heal Excellency Ape's injuries, the great sage, heaven's equal, would definitely not mind continuing to extract the mountain of life force until all the earth's essence in Japan was exhausted. Although the people in the History Compilation Committee believed that the great sage, heaven's equal's injuries did not need to go to that extent to recover, at the same time, it was uncertain whether the mountain of life could be appeased. Therefore, at the very least, the city was still in danger. No one knew when the mountain of life force would be completely extracted, and it would be the city's turn to be extracted. It was precisely because of this that the winter horse was so anxious. Noah could only come here to take a look. The situation is indeed not optimistic. Noah stared at the gradually withered trees in the depths of the mountains and was speechless. Your Excellency, if you want to fight with the monkey, then hurry up and come over. Why are you late? King, what should we do now? Hui Na asked. If there is a need to fight, Hui Na should be able to help a little. Hui Na took down the cloth bag from her shoulder as she said that. The weapon in the bag was not the Sky Cluster Cloud sword. It was a weapon that Hui Na had asked the Autumn Yard to send over overnight. Although it was not as good as the Sky Cluster Cloud sword, it was still a famous sword that was hard to come by. With Hui Na's invite God to descend, she could even fight a divine beast to the end. Let's get ready for the battle first. Noah turned his head and looked at Yoli. Wanli Gu, you can go back first. Leave this to us. Unlike Hui Na, Yoli was just an ordinary conjurer. If they wanted to obtain any information, they would need Yoli's ability. However, Yoli would not be of much use in a head-on battle. Therefore, it was wise to let Yoli stay away from this dangerous area. Otherwise, Noah was not confident that he could protect Yoli from the god of disobedience since he could not use his authority. Yoli naturally understood this, so he nodded without hesitation. I understand. I wish both of you good luck. Yoli bowed deeply as soon as he finished speaking. He then turned around and walked into the darkness that looked like a door. It was the magic door called the dimensional portal. When Yoli's figure disappeared into the darkness wriggled and disappeared. Hui na. Noah then turned around and faced the direction of the mountains again. Let's go. Yes, King. Hui na nodded without hesitation. However, just when the both of them were about to enter the mountains, a voice was suddenly heard. Both of you, please wait for a moment. As the voice was heard, a silhouette flew out of the mountains like a bird. It drew a perfect parabola and landed in front of Noah and Hui na. Noah and Hui na stopped at the same time. It's you? Noah frowned. Lu Yinghua. That's me. Lu Yinghua clasped his fists and bowed solemnly to Noah. Honorable Master Noah, Lu Yinghua is here to offer you the highest respect. I wish you to live as long as the heavens and never be destroyed. I wish you eternal glory and glory. The whole place was suddenly silent. Hui na blinked and looked like she didn't understand the situation at all. The corners of Noah's mouth twitched, and he felt like he was being cheated. You. What are you doing? What's wrong? Lu Yinghua raised his head with some doubts. Is there anything strange about Lu Yinghua's etiquette? There seems to be, but there doesn't seem to be. Noah said, extremely uncomfortable. Why are you bowing to me with such a tone and grammar? Isn't that natural? Lu Yinghua said. Master Noah is the unparalleled king of god slayers. Don't you deserve this etiquette? Let's not talk about whether I deserve it or not. Noah's eyelids twitched. In any case, is there a need to bow so solemnly? I'm sorry. Because of Master's teachings, I have to pay my respects to the god slayers. Lu Yinghua looked bitter. If Master knows that I don't respect someone like him, I will definitely face all kinds of near-death experiences. Noah was suddenly speechless. So that was the case. This child was also a victim. Noah could only collect his emotions and look at Lu Yinghua. Since you're here, that means that sect leader Luo Hao is also here, right? Yes. Lu Yinghua answered honestly. Master has already entered the mountain and is preparing to blow the entire mountain away. What? Noah was dumbfounded. Why? According to Master, since the great sage has already merged with the mountain, then it's fine to just blow the mountain away, Lu Yinghua said. In that case, the great sage will naturally appear. Just because of that? Just because of this reason, he was preparing to blow the entire mountain away? How little common sense did one have to be to do this? Not to mention Noah, even Hui na was speechless. By the way, Master also said. At this time, Lu Yinghua raised a hand and curled it slightly like a fist, letting a trace of cursed power curl around it. His gaze was fixed on Hui na, containing extreme indifference and bigotry. It's natural and reasonable for the king to meet with the king. However, those who are not the king had better know their place. If you insist on stepping into the king's territory and offend the king, then Yinghua will teach you a lesson on your behalf. Chapter 14:27. Following Lu Yinghua's emotionless words, Noah and Hui na both narrowed their eyes. The former was more or less angry because of Luo Hao's words. The latter was more or less angry because of Lu Yinghua's performance. Putting Hui na aside, Noah felt that since Luo Hao had arrived, the trouble of the great sage, Heaven's Equal, should be left to the leader to deal with. There was no need for him to get involved. Although the person who released the great sage, Heaven's Equal, was Noah, and Noah was also responsible for dealing with the great sage, it was just a battle. If someone was willing to take it on, then Noah didn't need to look for trouble. If no one was willing to take it on and only Noah could do it, then Noah wouldn't mind doing it himself. Noah had such a mentality. However, it turned out that Noah didn't seem to be able to be a hands-off boss. It was just like the ominous premonition last night. Compared to the great sage, Heaven's Equal, Luo Hao was undoubtedly a super big trouble. Judging from Luo Hao's declaration of destroying the entire mountain in order to dig the great sage, Heaven's Equal, out of the mountain, she probably wouldn't mind dragging the surrounding cities into the battle to get rid of the great sage, heaven's equal, right? Furthermore, the great sage, heaven's equal, wasn't someone who would consider whether or not he would affect others during the battle. Once the two of them clashed, there was a real possibility that this city would be wiped off the map. In the end, a prisoner he accidentally released killed so many ordinary people. Noah wouldn't even be able to sleep well. Sure enough, it was a huge mistake to let Luo Hao, who has lost her personality, deal with this matter. The anger in Noah's heart was successfully aroused. If I don't teach you a lesson, you'll really think that you're the only one in the world, crazy woman. At this moment, Huina spoke at the right time. Then, King, you should go to leader Luo Hao first. Hearing this, Noah took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in his heart. He glanced at Lu Yinghua and then looked at Huina. Then I'll leave this place to you. Can you handle it? In terms of age, Lu Yinghua seemed to be younger than Huina. However, Noah sensed a strong aura from this young martial artist. Her aura was probably much stronger than Erica's and Liliana's. No matter what, he was the direct disciple of the God Slayer, whose martial arts were unparalleled in the world. His strength could not be judged by his appearance and age. The only person who could win against Lu Yinghua was probably Paul Brantley, an existence at the pinnacle of humanity's holy night. Even in Europe, the birthplace of magic, there were only a few people of this level. There were no more than 10 of them. Even if the entire world was included, not counting those transcendental existences like the monks and princesses in the secluded world, there would probably not be more than 10 of them. Although Huina could use the God's Descent technique to borrow the power of the gods, she did not know if she could win against Lu Yinghua without Tian Songyun. If she could not win, with Lu Yinghua's extreme dislike of women, he would not show mercy, right? Perhaps she had guessed Noah's thoughts. Huina pursed her lips and smiled. That smile was neither elegant nor coarse. It was the smile of a wild warrior. Don't worry about me, King. Huina has always been cultivating in the mountains. I haven't met an opponent in this country for a long time. Huina actually wants to have a good fight. Is that so? Noah caught the hint of eagerness in Huina's eyes. He did not object and directly nodded. Then I'll leave this place to you. After saying this, Noah no longer hesitated. He directly turned into a stream of light and rushed into the mountains. At the scene, only the two prodigies from China and Japan were left standing at the peak of their respective countries. Lu Yinghua, who had been quietly watching Noah leave, turned his gaze to Huina at this time. I didn't think that sister would actually let King leave and stay behind to deal with me alone. Should I say that she is brave but not resourceful? At this time, a paranoid smile appeared on Lu Yinghua's face. It was a smile that only appeared when he had all the emotions of self-confidence, arrogance, disdain, and condescension. In front of the king, the Chinese wuxia was respectful. When facing others, or rather facing women, the arrogance and disdain that came from the bottom of his heart was completely revealed. This kind of natural provocation and arrogance, should it really be said that like teacher, like disciple? Unfortunately, the person facing this proud and arrogant child was not someone who was good at observing people's expressions. Instead, it was someone who grew up in the mountains, naive, romantic, and without scheming. Even though Huina had been taught proper etiquette by the Qingqiu courtyard, causing her every movement to exude the elegance of a Yamato Nadeshiko, this kind of temperament was only naturally exuded from her every movement. It had already merged into Huina's subconscious. In essence, Huina was still a carefree wild child. It's been a long time since Huina met an opponent who can be so confident in a one-on-one fight with me. Huina revealed a fearless smile as she untied the knife pouch on her shoulder. She opened the pouch and looked directly at Lu Yinghua, her eyes full of bright expression. Do you think you can win against Huina? It's not that I haven't heard of sister's name before. She is the chief witch of Japan's spell world, a genius of spirit summoning, a person who can use the God's Descent technique. She is very difficult to deal with. Lu Yinghua said this with a somewhat cunning and treacherous smile. Even if it is me, it is still very dangerous to fight with an opponent who can borrow the power of God. If I don't use all my skills, I probably can't defeat sister, right? In other words, as long as you use all your skills, you can win against Hui Na, right? The fearless smile on Hui Na's pretty face became more intense. She raised her hand, let a section of the knife handle out of the cloth bag, and held it tightly. Then don't let Hui Na down. Don't worry, I am definitely not the type to show mercy to women. Lu Yinghua sneered aloud. No, it should be said that because the opponent is a woman, I will not show mercy. Be prepared. The battle between the two countries' most outstanding geniuses was about to start. On the other side, Noah, who flew directly into the mountains, arrived at the top of the mountain in just a few seconds and descended. It was unknown if the god who had merged with the mountain felt Noah's arrival, but the entire space on the top of the mountain suddenly trembled, and a more violent fluctuation of curse power surged out. Looking up, it was as if the entire top of the mountain was steaming, making the field of vision appear to be in a distorted state. On such a distorted top of the mountain, there was a beautiful figure standing with the distorted top of the mountain as the background, with her back facing Noah. Long time no see, Rakshasa king of a foreign country. With such a sweet and light voice, the peerless beauty slowly turned around and faced Noah. An extremely majestic smile appeared on her face, which was sweeter and more lovely than anyone else's. It has been less than half a year, and you and I can meet so quickly. It seems that we are quite fated. I don't know if we are fated. Noah raised his eyes and met the girl's gaze. All I know is that you've made the already troublesome matter even more troublesome. I believe that you'll be able to solve this matter. I'm just like an idiot. Are you insulting me? The sweet and lovely smile on Luo Hao's face suddenly disappeared slowly. Her beautiful eyebrows frowned slightly, and she stared at Noah. I, Luo Tzuelian, have indeed been defeated by you, but Rakshasa king of a foreign country, you have to know that even so, I am still the unparalleled leader of Wulin in the world. I will not tolerate your nonsense. Whether it is nonsense or not, presumably, you have no self-awareness. But it doesn't matter, I am also very angry now. Noah closed his eyes and sighed deeply. As he walked forward, he used some rough movements to tear open the collar of his shirt. Then, his eyes suddenly opened. What Monkey King? What Wulin leader? If you want to fight, come to me face to face. Bastard. Chapter 1428. It had to be said that in the face of all kinds of capricious guys, Noah was really angry. Although the person who released Sun Wukong was Noah, if Susanoo didn't drag Noah into secluded world without permission and had been singing a duet with the monk, doing whatever he wanted, then Noah wouldn't have attacked. If Noah didn't launch an attack and didn't use the good departure sword, the great sage, heaven's equals curse wouldn't have been split open. The great sage, heaven's equal wouldn't have come out, let alone attract Luo Hao and cause all kinds of trouble. How could Noah not be angry when such a group of guys who didn't care about the feelings of others and only cared about their own enjoyment got involved in bigger and bigger troubles, but he couldn't sit back and do nothing. What's more, this time, Sun Wukong's appearance was very likely to attract guys like Nivea and Yerek. The trouble, like a snowball, became bigger and bigger. Originally, he just wanted to spend some time peacefully in this island country and properly think about how to deal with Noah, the final trial of the humans. However, his plan was directly destroyed by these guys. Perhaps, this was also the reason why Noah's nature was there, and there was no way to erase it. After all, powerful power was bound to attract all kinds of existences. Therefore, in this world, the deicide and the disobedient gods were often the center of various events. Like fate, they would always meet in various ways, kill each other, and cause disputes. This was universal no matter which world it was in. Therefore, Noah, who had more power than the average deicide and disobedient gods, and even if he used all his strength, it was not impossible to wipe out all the deicide and disobedient gods. With this level of power, it was only a matter of time before he attracted all kinds of existences and was involved in all kinds of events. However, even so, it didn't mean that Noah had no temper. Was it attracted by one's own power? Okay. But if you want to find fault, you have to be prepared to pay the price. Because it wasn't that Noah wouldn't fight back. Whether you are a deicide or a disobedient God, since you are ready to find trouble with others, then be prepared to be punished. After the words, Noah's hand bloomed with a bright light. The light turned into a dazzling white light and condensed into the shape of a sword. Noah held it tightly in his hand. After the light dissipated, the silver holy sword flowing with white light was exposed in the air. Demon Slayer. However, it wasn't the Demon Slayer that Aster transformed into. While the elf girl was still asleep and awakening all her power, Noah used weapon refinement to create his own unique elf device. Without Aster's cooperation, Noah wouldn't be able to display even half of Aster's strength before he went into hibernation. However, it was only with the help of the elven device that Noah was able to display such stunning sword skills. Thus, the energy source in Noah's body suddenly rotated, and all the energy in his body turned into endless divine might energy. The rich divine power was poured into the silver holy sword, causing the bright light to illuminate the entire space. Bring it on. In Noah's angry declaration, Luohao raised a hand in front of her, blocking the bright light that filled the entire space. Her gaze was fixed on Noah, and after a while, a dizzying smile bloomed on her beautiful face. Although I don't know what's going on, Rakshasa King, compared to before, you seem to have become a lot more violent, but at the same time, you have become a lot more majestic. Your current expression is an expression that only a true indomitable man would have. As expected of the king who once defeated me. Very good. Luohao's entire body surged with curse power as she shouted loudly. Since that's the case, let the unparalleled Luo Tsuelian prove the strength and perseverance of a foreign king. Let the world know that although I, Luohao, am a woman, I am also a hero who is not weaker than a man. His words caused another loud laughter to erupt from the crowd. That's right, that's right. That's how it should be. It doesn't matter if you're a woman. It doesn't matter if you're a man. As long as you can display your strength in a dignified manner. That is a hero who can support the heavens. How can I, the Monkey King, be left out of such an irresistible battle between heroes? Following this sentence, the curse power that surged out from the entire mountain suddenly went berserk. Soon after, the entire mountain began to tremble. Noah and Luohao's expressions froze at the same time, and their bodies tensed up, stabilizing their bodies. Under such circumstances, the mountain trembled more and more violently. Immediately after, Noah and Luohao sensed something and turned their heads at the same time, looking at the highest point of the mountain. Over there was a huge rock. At a certain moment, the trembling of the mountain suddenly stopped. Bang! Under the gaze of Noah and Luohao, the huge rock suddenly burst open, stirring up gravel all over the sky and scattering in all directions. Like bullets, the gravel shot in the direction of Noah and Luohao. Noah and Luohao's eyes flashed at the same time. One stepped on the ground and suddenly retreated, while the other stepped on the 8 trigram steps and glided away like a phantom. Bang, 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 bang. Pieces of gravel fell to the ground like bullets, but they were like bombs, suddenly exploding the ground, smashing holes one after another. Then, in the huge rock that burst open, a golden light burst into the sky, turned into a figure, somersaulted, and stepped on a golden cloud that suddenly flashed. Sun Wukong, the Monkey King of the Mountain Curtain Cave of Huagua, the great sage equal to heaven, is here. Excellency Ape, who stepped on the cloud, lowered his head, and a pair of eyes called fiery golden eyes flashed with dazzling light. Godslayers, what are you waiting for? Tell me your names. Undoubtedly, high above the clouds, the voice of the great sage, heaven's equal echoed clearly throughout the entire mountain top. Undoubtedly, the distance was extremely far, but the figure of the great sage, heaven's equal, was clearly imprinted in the eyes of Noah and Luohao. This alone was enough to show the great power of the great sage, heaven's equal. It seemed that at the moment when Noah and Luohao were about to confront each other, the great sage, Heaven's Equal successfully regained his complete state and healed all his injuries. Finally, you've appeared? Great Sage. Luo Hao looked up at the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal in the clouds, and shouted loudly. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. I've also been waiting for this moment for a long time. The Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, looked up to the sky and laughed. I didn't expect that as soon as I came out, I would meet two Godslayers at the same time. Should I say that I'm lucky? Or unlucky? As he said this, the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, laughed as a shocking amount of cursed power surged out of his body. The vast amount of cursed power turned into a substantial impact, with the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, as the center. With a jolt, the clouds around the somersault cloud were all dispersed. Then, the terrifying cursed power poured down like water from the sky, like air that contained mass, fiercely suppressing everything. Feeling the terrifying cursed power surging out of the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal's body, both Noah and Luo Hao were shocked. This was because the terrifying cursed power had far exceeded that of any disobedient god that the two of them had met in their lives. Take Noah for example. Noah felt that at this moment, the cursed power of the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, had surpassed that of Welslana, Mercado, Perseus, Susanoo, and Athena. With the level of cursed power that the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, had displayed, one could imagine that his power was definitely greater than that of the other disobedient gods. What's going on? Noah couldn't hide his surprise. How did he suddenly become so strong? That's right. He suddenly became so strong. In Secluded World, Noah had a short confrontation with the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal. At that time, the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, had been hit by the wind pressure of the Sword of Guile, EA, due to carelessness, and had been severely injured, resulting in a short confrontation. However, at that time, the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, had not been as strong as he was now. Now, even Noah did not have the confidence to defeat the Monkey King without using his authority. What was going on? Chapter 1429. Wang. The Great Sage, Heaven's Equal spell power surged out like a tidal wave from the sky. It enveloped the entire space, causing the gravity to suddenly increase by several times. The ground trembled slightly from the pressure. Sensing the terrifying cursed power from the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, Noah and Luo Hao's expressions turned solemn. Both of them were at the top of the God Slayer's ranks. Moreover, it was not the first time either of them had fought against the god of disobedience. Among them, there were naturally some who were at the top of the God Slayer's ranks in terms of power and reputation. They belonged to the highest level of the God Slayer's ranks. However, at this very moment, the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, gave Noah and Luo Hao the feeling that he had completely descended into the god of disobedience that they had fought before. From Noah's perspective, the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal's power would definitely be at the top of the 4-digit ranks if he was in the box, comparable to some of the strongest species. And without using his authority, Noah did not have the power to match a 4-digit number of pinnacle beings. In other words, in terms of power alone, the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, had now surpassed Noah and Luo Hao. Undoubtedly, the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, had not been so strong when he was in the Secluded World. Why had he suddenly become so strong now? Unfortunately, the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, did not give Noah time to think. Come, God Slayers. Give me, old son, a battle that can quench my hot-bloodedness. As he shouted these words, the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, turned his hand like an agile monkey. The Rui Jingu Bang, a peerless weapon, flashed in his hand. Immediately, the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, turned his eyes of fire and gold to Noah's direction. That kid over there, you severely injured me in the Secluded World. At that time, I said that I would get my revenge sooner or later. Now is the time. I'll start with you. As soon as he finished speaking, the somersault cloud that the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal, was standing on trembled suddenly. The golden cloud suddenly exploded, carrying the Great Sage, Heaven's Equal. It turned into a ray of light that flashed brilliantly. It drew a perfect parabola in the air and headed straight for Noah. On the somersault cloud, the great sage, heaven's equal, could achieve true godlike speed. That wasn't just a simple increase in speed. In essence, it was an ability to control time. Therefore, once one entered the state of God speed, not only would one's own speed increase explosively, but the speed of everything other than one's own body would also decrease drastically. Simply put, it was to increase one's sense of time by entering the God speed world. Under such circumstances, the great sage, heaven's equal, who was still far above the clouds, immediately rushed down in less than a second. He flashed in front of Noah with the help of a stream of light. In the eyes of the bystanders, it was only the blink of an eye. The figure that was still above the clouds had already arrived in front of Noah. Noah, on the other hand, felt a blur in front of his eyes. Then, a figure suddenly rushed over. "Take my cudgel." The steel cudgel fell from the sky with a whistling sound. Like a windmill, it smashed heavily toward Noah's head with a sharp sonic boom. Under the power of God's speed, even Noah, who had superb sensing ability, could only sense movement when the great sage, heaven's equal, was within 3 meters of him. It was because he could sense movement that Noah was able to fight with an opponent who had the God speed authority without using the mind's eye technique. As a result, the energy under Noah's feet surged violently. A large amount of divine power gathered under his feet and suddenly exploded, causing Noah's figure to instantly take a step back due to the push from the exploding divine power energy, as if he was moving horizontally. Swoosh! The extremely heavy Jingu cudgel immediately brushed past less than 5 centimeters in front of Noah and landed in the air. The force it carried caused the ground to crack slightly with a "kacha" sound. The godly sea-calming needle, which weighed as much as 13,500 pounds, was indeed not for show. Understanding this, Noah narrowed his eyes. He extracted a part of the divine power from the source of divine power, turned it into magic power, and infused it into his hands and feet. Clang! A burst of magic light suddenly flashed on Noah's hands and feet. It turned into magic lines like electric wires, covering Noah's hands and feet. If he did not use magic to strengthen his arms and feet, he would not be able to deal with the great sage, heaven's equal's attack. After strengthening his arms and feet, Noah simply closed his eyes and focused all his attention on the use of sensing ability. He suddenly raised the holy sword in his hand. A steady stream of divine power was also infused. The holy sword flashed with a brilliant white light, causing Noah to turn into a bolt of lightning. With a sharp sound of breaking wind, he shot toward the great sage, heaven's equal, at extreme speed. Ultimate sword skill. Primary form: purple lightning. A sword as fast as lightning pierced out violently. At this time, only less than a second had passed since the great sage, heaven's equal, had swung his cudgel. Good timing. The great sage, heaven's equal, was both surprised and delighted when he sensed the swift and fierce sword. The somersault cloud beneath his feet rose abruptly, and the Jingu bang in his hand was like a piece of steel that fell from the sky, piercing downwards viciously. Clang! The shockingly heavy steel cudgel pierced the lightning sword that the great sage, heaven's equal, had just passed by. It collided with the holy sword, which was blooming with a brilliant white light, causing sparks to fly in all directions. Relying on its shocking weight, it pressed down the holy sword in Noah's hand. Then, the somersault cloud carried the great sage, heaven's equal, and his body swooped down like a goshawk. He shot directly above Noah at the speed of a meteor. Then, the great sage, heaven's equal's Jingu bang swung down heavily with a hair-raising wind. His every move had already reached the level of returning to simplicity and simplifying the complicated, but the might of his moves was even greater. In the face of such a merciless attack by the great sage, heaven's equal, Noah did not dare to be careless. The divine power under his feet gathered again and exploded, turning into a pushing force that pushed Noah's body back instantly. The holy sword in his hand went from bottom to top, stabbing towards the great sage, heaven's equal's throat. From the beginning to the end, Noah did not open his eyes. He relied on his sensing ability and was not blinded by the great sage, heaven's equal's lightning speed. Therefore, the sword that was stabbing towards the great sage, Heaven's Equal was swung naturally in the direction of the great sage, Heaven's Equal's aura without any deviation. Therefore, in the next moment, the holy sword that was stabbing upwards collided with the Jingu Bang that was swinging downwards. Clang! The crisp sound of the collision rang out, causing a powerful impact. At the same time, Noah and the great sage, Heaven's Equal, were sent flying. Both of them retreated rapidly, pulling apart the distance between them. It was a long story, but the entire process of the battle only lasted a few seconds. Within a few seconds, Noah and the great sage, Heaven's Equal, had exchanged a few moves. They exchanged exquisite sword techniques with the Jingu Bang technique, but the outcome could not be determined. Of course, a few seconds was not enough to determine the outcome of the battle between the God Slayer and the God of Disobedience. However, the great sage, Heaven's Equal's power had inexplicably increased significantly, becoming much stronger than Noah's. He still had the upper hand. The proof was that when Noah was still retreating, the great sage, Heaven's Equal, had steadied himself on the somersault cloud. Like a shooting star, he continued to dash towards Noah at lightning speed. At this moment, a feminine voice rang out. "How dare you forget that I, Luo Tsuelian, am still here? Great sage! You are indeed unforgivable." The moment the voice rang out, a beautiful figure suddenly appeared in front of the great sage, Heaven's Equal. Facing the great sage, Heaven's Equal, she struck out a palm that could break mountains and rivers and smash rocks. Clang! The delicate palm collided with the hard steel Jingu Bang, giving rise to the sound of metal clashing. What? The great sage, Heaven's Equal, was shocked. You actually took my Jingu Bang with your bare hands? The sea stabilizer of the East Sea Dragon Palace? That is indeed an earth-shattering divine weapon. Luo Hao said. It's a pity that my fists and palms can split the sky and shatter the earth. If you can stabilize the sea, then I can stir it up again with one palm. After that, like a phoenix spreading its wings, the palm attack turned into a storm, enveloping the great sage, Heaven's Equal. Chapter 1430. Amidst the sharp sound of the wind, palm strikes continuously erupted from Luo Hao's body. With the wave of her slender hand, palm shadows filled the sky and swept towards the great sage, Heaven's Equal. Each of the palm shadows was like a phoenix spreading its wings in flight. They were both swift and beautiful as they continuously charged towards the great sage, Heaven's Equal. This was the highest level palm technique that Luo Hao had ever practiced, the 12 flying phoenix divine palms. Looking at the palm strikes that swept through space and compressed the air to the point of creating sonic booms, Luo Hao must have also used the power that could bring about earth-shattering strength of a Vidra divine technique. The combination of strength and technique forced the great sage, Heaven's Equal, whose strength had suddenly skyrocketed, to take it seriously. He quickly raised the Rui Jingu Bang in his hand and blocked in front of him. Like a violent storm, the palm strikes poured out like a curtain of rain and landed on the astonishingly heavy steel rod. Dang 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 dang. Immediately, as the palm with astonishing strength landed on the steel rod, a clear sound like that of a bell rang out continuously, as if it was ringing out continuously. The great sage, Heaven's Equal, who was waving the Rui Jingu Bang slightly, blocked all of Luo Hao's palm strikes. However, the palm strikes contained an extremely strong force, causing the great sage, Heaven's Equal's arm to gradually become numb. Riding on the somersault cloud, his figure was repeatedly pushed back. For a moment, he was actually suppressed. No. To be able to block all of Luo Hao's palm strikes that combined the Vidra divine technique and the 12 flying phoenix divine palms, and only be pushed back, it was enough to show that the great sage, Heaven's Equal, still firmly held the advantage. After all, every palm strike was a ferocious attack that could split mountains and split rocks. If the great sage, Heaven's Equal, did not have the invincible Vidra body, it would not be surprising for an ordinary person to have their hand bones shattered and their internal organs ruptured. And to be able to block all of Luo Hao's palm strikes with a calm expression proved that the great sage, Heaven's Equal, still had some strength left. The peerless Wuxia king saw this with her outstanding martial arts eyesight and immediately chanted. 1 strength defeats 10 techniques, 1 strength suppresses 10 techniques, 1 kick carries the force of 1,000 caddies, 1 foot settles the earth. Through chanting the words of the Vajra divine art, Luo Hao raised the cursed power circulating in her body by several levels in one breath, causing a majestic fluctuation of cursed power to erupt from her soft and beautiful body. After that, Luo Hao raised her jade-like palm high up, slightly accumulating strength, and struck out with a palm strike that was heavier than any of her previous strikes. Clang! Accompanied by a metallic sound that was louder than any of the previous clashes, the great sage, Heaven's equal, who was standing on the somersault cloud, was sent flying by the powerful force. Bam 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 bam. Even though he was standing on the somersault cloud and was quite a distance away from the ground, the great sage, Heaven's equal, who was flying backward, caused the ground to be torn apart by the powerful force created by the friction between the air and the ground. A long gully was formed in the ground. Only after retreating a few hundred meters did the great sage, Heaven's equal, control the somersault cloud and stabilize himself in midair. Phew! However, at this moment, an extremely sharp sound pierced through the air. The great sage, Heaven's equal's eyes of fire and gold suddenly flashed, and he suddenly raised his head and looked forward. There, a holy sword that was shining with a brilliant white light shot out like an arrow from a bow, like a flash of light, in the direction of the great sage, Heaven's equal. The great sage, Heaven's equal, quickly raised the Rui Jingu Bang in his hand. Ding! The holy sword that shot out like an arrow immediately hit the Rui Jingu Bang, causing intense sparks. At this moment, a figure rushed out from the top of the mountain, cut through the air, and flashed in front of the holy sword. He raised a fist that gathered a large amount of divine power, and heavily punched the tip of the holy sword's hilt. Ultimate sword skill. Form 6 Shattered Tooth. The fist that gathered a large amount of divine power fell on the tip of the holy sword's hilt. With a bang, the dense divine power poured into the holy sword in the most violent way, like a shock wave. Stimulated by such a violent divine power, the silver holy sword bloomed with a dazzling white light, and with the force of the attack, it crazily hit the Rui Jingu Bang. Bang! The sound of glass shattering was heard. It was the sound of the holy sword that was stimulated by the most violent way, and the sharpness of the holy sword increased by several times in an instant. The fist that hit the tip of the hilt heavily pushed the Rui Jingu Bang out, and the holy sword shattered the Rui Jingu Bang. That was the effect of Form 6 of the ultimate sword skill, called Shattered Tooth. The purpose was to destroy the enemy's weapon. What? The great sage, Heaven's equal's expression finally changed. At this moment, the holy sword, which had shattered the Rui Jingu Bang, continued to shoot forward without slowing down. It turned into a ray of cold light and shot towards the eyes of the great sage, Heaven's equal, with the force of the fist that had struck the top of the sword hilt. Looking at the sharp sword tip that was constantly magnified in his eyes of fire and gold, the great sage, Heaven's equal, did not have time to be surprised. He hurriedly rode the somersault cloud, turned into a phantom, and flew away like a meteor, avoiding the incoming attack. The holy sword that did not lose its momentum shot towards the sky, until a certain moment, it suddenly exploded into pieces. Noah then floated down from midair, landing at a position some distance away from Luo Hao. In midair, Sun Wukong, who was standing on the somersault cloud, stared blankly at the broken Jingu Bang in his hands. After a long while, he came back to his senses and shot his lightning-like gaze at Noah. You actually broke my Rui Jingu Bang? If it was the real Rui Jingu Bang, of course, it wouldn't have been broken so easily, Noah said as he lifted his head and met the great sage's gaze. It's a pity that the Jingu Bang in your hand is a god relic that was consolidated with authority. It's not the real thing, is it? Just like Susanu's Kusanagi sword, although it was a god relic, it was not the real Kusanagi sword. It was only a subordinate god that possessed the abilities of a god relic. The Rui Jingu Bang that the great sage, Heaven's equal, was not the real stabilizing needle, but a god relic that was consolidated with authority. That was the reason why the Rui Jingu Bang was broken so easily by the demon slayer. Of course, the power of the ultimate sword skill was one of the reasons. However, the bigger reason was that the demon slayer had the ability to break all curses. That was the reason why the Rui Jingu Bang that was consolidated with authority could be broken by Noah's ultimate sword skill that specialized in destroying weapons. Devil King, I didn't know that you have such an exquisite sword skill. Luo Hao exclaimed in awe and anger at the same time. Even I, who's said to be the best in the world in martial arts, can't find fault with such an exquisite sword skill. I think it's comparable to all the sword skills that I've learned in my life. Since you have such an exquisite sword skill, why didn't you use it during the battle with me the last time? Do you think that I, Luo Hao, am not qualified to make you use such a sword skill? Before Noah could answer, the great sage, Heaven's Equal's laughter interrupted him. How exciting, God Slayers! One of you can take my Rui Jingu Bang with his bare hands while the other can break my stabilizing needle with his exquisite sword skill. It's amazing indeed. It seems like it's still dangerous for me to fight both of you at once even though I have the support of the Ancient Covenant. The great sage, Heaven's Equal's words attracted Noah's attention. The support of the Ancient Covenant? Noah looked at the great sage, Heaven's Equal. Could it be that the Ancient Covenant is the reason why you suddenly became so strong? It was a pity that the great sage, Heaven's Equal, did not answer. Instead, he said, it's indeed troublesome to deal with two god slayers alone. I have no choice but to call for help. With that, the great sage, Heaven's Equal, raised a palm and made a Buddhist chant. Treasure illuminates heaven and earth, divine sword combines yin and yang. I, the great sage, Heaven's Equal, Sun Wukong, use the covenant of brotherhood to summon my brothers. The solemn voice reverberated in the air. A vast amount of curse power erupted from the great sage, Heaven's Equal's body and spread in all directions. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.